I have created scientific magic. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 101, Ring of the Faceless. How is this possible? Raphael subconsciously wanted to refute. He was sure that the heliocentric theory was correct, but he had not yet determined whether the continent under his feet was a plane or a sphere. It was too arbitrary to rely solely on the sails on the sea as a basis. There were many people who thought like Raphael. Compared with the free-fall experiment that could be verified, the planet theory was the most incredible. No one could make a sphere so big that it seemed like a flat ground when you walked forward, and you couldn't even imagine such an existence. It was even more incomprehensible why the seawater would adhere to a sphere instead of falling directly off. However, the doubts of the crowd did not last long, because the legendary wizard who had wandered in the sky for several days and almost got lost finally came back and brought in news that shocked everyone. The continent under their feet might indeed be round. This shocking news instantly swept the entire wizard land, whether they believed it or not. Everyone remembered this strange name, Lin En, from outside the wizard land. Professor Lin En. The next morning, after finishing an Olympiad class, Lin En was thinking about what creature's spiritual lessons to use as a basis for promotion, but was interrupted by a voice. Sir Luo, what's the matter? Lin En looked at Luo behind him in surprise and asked, "This is today's Magic Daily. You probably haven't had time to read it yet?" Luo smiled and handed a newspaper to Lin En. After seeing the specially enlarged headlines on it, Lin En's mouth twitched. Overturning the foundation of magic, the law of free fall, the roar from the secret law society. The magic theory of the wizard land is already outdated. Are you deliberately causing trouble for me, Sir Luo? Lin En could already imagine how big a storm the entire wizard land would set off. How is it possible? I'm just an ordinary writer. It's not up to me to decide what content to publish. Luo shrugged and said jokingly, "And I just repeated what you said." Lin En rolled his eyes. Other things were fine, but he didn't say he wanted to overturn the magic foundation or anything. Don't worry, a member of the parliament has already gone up to the sky to confirm that the continent under our feet is indeed a sphere, Luo said with emotion. Even now, he still found it hard to believe. Confirmed from high in the sky? How high would that be? Lin En's face was full of astonishment. Although the planet is round, the size of this thing is really too big. If it is based on the size of the Earth in the previous life, it needs to rise to 100 kilometers above the ground to see a more obvious arc. Of course, maybe the planet under the feet is not that big, or maybe the legendary wizard's eyesight is very good, but at least it needs to be more than 10 kilometers to be able to observe the arc with a naked eye, which is close to the height of the ozone layer on the Earth in the previous life. But this also saved him a lot of trouble. In this way, the two theories he proposed were verified by facts. And with a legendary wizard as an endorsement, he could avoid a lot of trouble. I think the invitation letter from the parliament should arrive in a few days, Luo said. Invitation? Lin En was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion. Of course it is an academic seminar. The wizarding land holds it once a year, and each school will send people to participate, Luo explained. And your airship? The patent application has been submitted by Lord Tick for you. Then I must thank him well next time I meet him, Lin En said with a smile. At night, Lin En entered the manor again as Ladak. Several crucibles placed on the laboratory table kept bubbling. He recorded the positions of all the things through his intelligent brain. Now they are still intact. Obviously, no one else has come in during this period. After checking the progress of the potion brewing as usual, Lin En took the Atlas of Magical Creatures and looked it up. It must be said that as a three-ring wizard who has lived for a long time, Ladak has a lot of books, and there is a lot of knowledge that cannot be obtained in the college library. For example, this Magical Creatures Atlas notes the spiritual lessons content and strength of more than 10 common magical creatures in their brains. Normally, the stronger they are, the more obvious the increase in mental power will be after they are promoted to formal wizards. The only thing that makes Lin En a little worried is that the Ladakh manor only has the spiritual essence of fire lions, petrified lizards and griffins. The strength of these three magical creatures can only be considered medium, and Lin En is not 100% sure that he can complete the promotion. After all, the original bodycarl's magic talent can only be considered average. If he had not traveled through time and space and strengthened his mental power through the fusion of two souls, it would be impossible for the growth of magic power reserves to reach the limit in just 2 months. While thinking, a slight magic fluctuation suddenly jumped up in the closed secret room. Lin En subconsciously became alert and looked at the place where the magic fluctuation came from. Under the broken floor tiles, something was flickering faintly. Mage's hand. Lin En raised his hand to cast a spell, and the broken floor tiles were quickly lifted up. A delicate ring underneath floated up and was photographed in front of him. Faceless ring? Lin En recognized this thing immediately, but this was not the one he received at the beginning, but a relic of Ladakh. He had thought that this thing had been burned by the white phosphorus fire long ago, but he did not expect it to be so hard, and there was no sign of damage at a high temperature of thousands of degrees, and it was constantly flashing with fluorescence. According to the description on the envelope, this should be the signal for the rally. Calculating the time, it is indeed the day for the Faceless to gather. Lin En's face changed involuntarily. Since Ladakh's soul had been scattered, many things could not be confirmed in person. He could only guess that the drawings of the aerospace airship were obtained by Ladakh from Ralph's brain using soul-searching witchcraft. However, there was no mention of any place where the aerospace airship was needed in the notes. So it is likely that Ladakh did not need this thing himself, but obtained it for others. Lin En hesitated for a moment, and soon made a decision. Perhaps he could attend this gathering as Ladakh to find out the truth about the Faceless Man. Lin En carefully input a trace of magic power into this place. It was an extremely strange feeling, as if his vision was instantly divided into two halves. One half was the scene in the secret room in front of him, and the other half was a dark space. P.S. The arc of the Earth can only be accurately seen at a distance of 100 kilometers here, using the term used by NASA. Chapter 102. Coincidentally, I also have some research on the human body. The body seemed to be in a chaos, surrounded by darkness. In front of him, more than a dozen figures were arranged in a circle, and the brilliance of magic was faintly emerging from their bodies. Lin En glanced over. Everyone's appearance was illusory, surging like unstable water waves. He could only vaguely distinguish the height, weight, and changes in facial expressions. Virtual scene detected. Do you want to analyze and search for the source of the signal? A prompt sound suddenly rang in Lin En's mind, almost scaring him. When he noticed that no one around him moved, he realized that the voice of the intelligent brain would not be transmitted into this space through magic. Yes, Lin En responded quietly in his mind. He was also very interested in this strange space. He didn't expect that this time he came to participate in the rally as Ladakh, and he actually had an unexpected gain. However, after looking at the progress of the analysis, Lin En's mouth twitched, because the progress of the analysis was very slow. About 2 minutes later, the number of illusory figures in this special space stopped increasing. Lin En counted a total of 15 people, including himself. Are all of the people here? The witch opposite said. Number 4 hasn't been here for a long time, right? The other person next to him shook his head. Maybe he died somewhere, who knows? Don't talk about those useless things, just start. A thin and tall shadow interrupted the two people's discussion impatiently, and then looked at the crowd and said, "Let me start. I'm talking about the human body. Those who are not interested can go away." As soon as these words came out, the 5 shadows disappeared immediately. Lin En watched silently without moving. The thin and tall figure quickly spoke. According to my research, there are more than 200 bones and more than 600 muscles in the human body. Muscles are composed of thin and long lines. If you go deeper, it is a strange organizational structure composed of 4 basic elements. As the thin and tall figure talked endlessly, the people present were either thinking deeply or laughing. From time to time, someone asked questions in the middle, and the wizard also answered them very patiently. After the explanation, The 8 people except Lin En stretched out their hands and ejected a transparent coin. Do you need to pay to listen to this knowledge? Lin En immediately thought of this, and it can be brought in directly through magic, so it should not be ordinary currency. Number 7. Do you have any objections to what I said? The wizard who spoke turned his head and looked at Lin En with dissatisfaction. His illusory body was shaking constantly, which was an angry gesture. According to the rules, if you don't want to listen, you can skip it and leave directly, but the other party didn't want to pay after listening. Under the gaze of dozens of eyes, Lin En was silent for a while, and then said with a smile, "You can think so. In fact, I already knew the knowledge you said. It's not something new, and it doesn't help me at all." However, these words made the wizard extremely dissatisfied. Lin En continued to speak without waiting for him to refute. "It just so happens that I have also done some research on the human body. For example, the lines that make up the muscles you mentioned, I named them muscle fibers. The total number of muscle fibers in the human body is about 6 billion, and they are composed of 73% water and 27% protein. As for bones, they are composed of collagen, calcium, phosphorus and other components." Lin En talked freely and expanded on the wizard's previous speech. Not only did he talk more detailed, he even made clear the proportions of the elements that make up these substances. The illusory figure of the tall and thin figure kept changing, and his face became gloomy. Although he didn't understand the terms such as protein and collagen at all, there were some information that he already knew but deliberately concealed. This means that the other party did not cheat, but actually had a deeper understanding of the human body. It seems that these coins should be left to number 7. Seeing that the tall and thin wizard didn't say a word, the witch sneered and said, but looking at Lin En, she couldn't help but feel a chill in her heart. How many human bodies did the other party dissect and study to understand so deeply? How did they count the 6 billion muscle fibers? You win this time. The tall and thin wizard looked grim, and threw the transparent coins he received to Lin En. Lin En used a trace of magic power to capture the coins, and the prompt sound of the intelligent brain sounded again. Unnamed energy detected, similar records in the database, whether to convert into energy? This time, Lin En chose no calmly. In view of the fact that so many people were watching, he did not intend to study it immediately. Since you have received the money, can you tell me what the so-called protein and calcium are? The tall and thin wizard said with a dark face. He was naturally very unhappy that Lin En had stolen his limelight, but the weird terms mentioned by the other party made him itchy. Protein is an important component of all cells and tissues in the human body. It is composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen and other elements. Lin En said a few words in a very general way. As for some more detailed things, he evaded the question by saying that he had not studied them clearly. The people present did not raise any doubts. The study of magic could not be accomplished overnight. In fact, they were surprised that Lin En could study so deeply. Although there were some minor episodes in the middle, the first lecture ended quickly. The figure that had disappeared before reappeared in this chaotic space. Then another wizard stood up and talked about psychic magic. The whole meeting lasted for several hours. Everyone talked about the knowledge that was not convenient to communicate openly. However, here, everyone could speak freely and even talk about the details of their human experiments without any care. The analysis progress of the intelligent brain also increased to 3%. Lin En listened very seriously and threw out 3 coins he had received before. After the meeting, the faceless men agreed on the time for the next meeting and then announced the adjournment. Hearing this news, Lin En's face became a little strange. Did they just adjourn the meeting? He thought someone would question why the new members recruited before did not show up, but no one mentioned this matter at all. Judging from the conversations between these people, this faceless organization can only be described as loose, as if it is just a place for mutual exchange of knowledge. Just as Lin En was about to leave this illusory space, a wizard beside him suddenly spoke up. Number 3, number 7, number 11, number 15, you stay for a while. Chapter 103 Hunting the Eye of Death. Soon, there were only 5 people left in the chaotic space. There were 3 men and 2 women, including himself. Lin En took a quick look, but due to lack of information, He did not start a conversation first. The witch at the side could not help but ask directly. North, I have already got the high-level magic crystal cannon you want. It took a lot of effort. Now you should be able to tell me what you need these things for, right? High-level magic crystal cannon? Lin En immediately looked at the person in surprise. This thing is a secret of the Alchemy Society. It is said that as long as there is enough magic power, each shot can have a power close to the power of the fourth ring magic. I want this thing, of course, to go to the Misty Sea and hunt for the Eye of Death. The wizard named North smiled grimly. The Eye of Death? The Great Whirlpool? Lin En looked at a loss, but the remaining few people immediately seemed to have thought of something, and a wizard said in fear, Are you crazy? The others could not help but refute. North, if you want to die, don't drag us along. Even a great wizard wouldn't dare to say that he is sure to hunt this kind of monster. Of course, they knew what the Eye of Death that North was talking about was. It was an extremely powerful magical creature in the Sea of Mist that could control the flow of water, devour souls, and was also the source of the whirlpool. According to the information obtained by the Parliament's Magical Creatures Research Institute, there were about 50 Eyes of Death in the entire Sea of Mist. Together with the legendary spell Lost Mist, it formed the most important line of defense against the invasion of the church. Even a great wizard would not be willing to face this kind of monster on the sea. Even if he won, it would be meaningless, as the other party could escape at any time. Amid the discussion among the crowd, Lin En finally had some understanding of this magical creature called Eye of Death. In other words, was the whirlpool in the Sea of Mist actually caused by a creature? Lin En immediately remembered the power that seemed to be able to capture people's hearts when he rushed through the Sea of Mist by boat before. Of course it's difficult normally, but who said I have to fight it on the sea? We don't need to take a boat to go there. North's mouth curled up a smile, and his eyes turned to Lin En. Are you going to rely on the airship to carry out beyond visual range strikes? Lin En instantly understood what the other party wanted to express. Although this powerful magical creature can control water flow and affect souls, it should not have the ability to fly. In other words, as long as they rise to a height of hundreds of meters, the ability of the Eye of Death will not be able to cause any impact on them, and they can only passively accept the punishment of the magic crystal cannon. No wonder Bloodthorn is willing to spend a lot of money to steal his airship blueprints. This is indeed the easiest way to kill the Eye of Death. Beyond visual range? A good name, and it's also very appropriate. North pulled the corner of his mouth and smiled proudly. I have a few more questions. First, how can we find the Eye of Death in the Sea of Fog and confirm the direction? Second, the visibility in the fog is very low. If you fly to a high altitude, how can you aim? Third, what if the other party escapes? Lin En asked. Hearing this, everyone present immediately looked at North. These points were very critical. If they were not able to solve them, then they would have worked in vain. Don't worry about these problems. I naturally have my own way. North kept it a secret and did not answer directly. He had been preparing for this hunt for a whole year. He was originally ready to move the magic crystal cannon to an alchemy ship and fight the Eye of Death. However, a few days ago, the visitor from outside the wizard's land made an airship that made North change his mind. Seeing North's confidence, everyone was a little moved. What can we get by helping you? A witch said. The Eye of Death corpse is worth at least 30,000 magic gold coins. I only need enough blood, and the rest will be distributed according to contribution, North said without hesitation, and then looked at Lin En. Radak, you contributed some blueprints of the airship, and you are the best at potion learning among us. Once you obtain the psychic essence of the Eye of Death, you will be the one to make it. Just hand in 3 bottles of source of magic power, and the rest will be your reward. If I'm not mistaken, the potion made with the psychic essence of the Eye of Death may allow people to become psychics. North's words made Lin En pause for a moment. The term psychic was not unfamiliar to him. In the land of wizards, it usually refers to those who are born with great mental power. For example, the white dove he had seen before could even perform strange psychic witchcraft during the apprenticeship stage, and even affect an archbishop in luck. Others usually need to be promoted to formal wizards before they can learn psychic magic. Even Lin En, who has experienced a soul fusion, is no exception. As early as the Seka's empire, he learned the method of performing Soul scream, from the white dove. Although he can use it, the effect is pitifully weak. Of course, North's words were not aimless. It was rumored that the evil wizard Merc, who was despised by the entire wizard land, became a psychic by brewing a potion made from the spirit of the Mind Flayer. And the power of the Eye of Death will only be stronger than that of the Mind Flayer. As for you, Barbara, after the matter is completed, I will give you 4,000 magic gold coins as the price for purchasing a high-level magic crystal cannon, North said. Barbara also showed a smile on her face. North's generosity was simply unimaginable. The value of a high-level magic crystal cannon was only about 2,000 magic gold coins, at most. The source of the channel was more troublesome, but the other party was willing to spend twice the price to buy it. Then North looked at the other two and also made a promise of a large sum of money. He would never allow any mistakes in this operation. The production and transformation of the airship will be completed in a few days. I think you should all be free, right? North glanced at everyone gloomily. The meaning was very obvious. Whether they were free or not, they must make time. Why not schedule it for the day after tomorrow? I have a very important experiment recently, Lin En took the initiative to suggest. But the real reason was of course that he said something different. The reason why he chose this time was because the day after tomorrow was the day when Yaita College was on holiday. Lin En naturally did not intend to be absent from this so-called hunting operation. North and others wanted to drive an airship made with stolen blueprints to hunt down a Death Eye and then take away most of the benefits. How could it be so easy? Chapter 104 Magical Airship. After discussing the details of hunting the Eye of Death, the gathering was officially over. The separated consciousness returned to the main body again. Lin En opened his hand, and 5 illusory coins were brought directly to him. Recalling the previous prompt sound of the intelligent brain, Lin En had some vague guesses in his mind. This thing might be related to the soul. Perhaps one coin represents a life. Unnamed energy detected. Whether to convert it into energy? The prompt sound of the intelligent brain sounded again. Lin En hesitated for a moment, but still chose yes. Even if these coins represent souls, those who died could not be resurrected. The next moment, the 5 illusory coins disappeared instantly, and instead, the energy increased by 5%. So high? Lin En was somewhat surprised. Doesn't that mean that if he had stood up and said a few more words just now and obtained enough illusory coins, he could have filled up the energy reserves of the intelligent brain? However, these energies are exchanged for knowledge. If he said too much, it might arouse suspicion. Not to mention that this thing might be related to the soul, and it is somewhat uncomfortable to use. Lin En quickly adjusted his mentality. This can be regarded as a way to quickly replenish the energy of the intelligent brain. Then he turned his attention to the boiling potion table in front of him. In another day or two, the potion will be ready. However, with a more perfect goal, Lin En naturally did not want to rely on the spiritual essence of the fire lion, petrified lizard or griffin to advance. This might cause some obstacles when he breaks through the great wizard in the future. Let's stop here for today's Olympiad class. In the next week, I need to study and improve a magic, so the class will be suspended for a while. Take advantage of these days. You can take the time to review the knowledge you have learned before. 2 days later, in Yaita Academy, Lin En looked at the apprentices under the stage and announced, although tomorrow is a holiday, he feels that the time may not be enough, so he simply asks for a few more days off. Great. As soon as Lin En finished speaking, a burst of enthusiastic cheers suddenly rang out in the classroom. There is no way. For more than a month, they have been mentally exhausted from calculating every day. However, the growth of mental power was also very rapid. Johnny even realized that the magic power in his body was close to perfection. As long as he completed one course, he could apply for graduation. Looking at the extremely excited wizard apprentices, Lin En couldn't help shaking his head. They were too happy too early. Then, the next step is to arrange homework. Lin En's voice was like the whisper of a devil. The mood of the apprentices was like riding a roller coaster, and they fell from heaven to the bottom of the valley in an instant. Don't worry. In fact, there are only a few hundred questions in total. It's not difficult at all. 5 minutes later, Lin En walked out of the classroom door under the resentful eyes of Alok and others. and returned to the room to take the magic potion and liquid explosives that he had made in the past few days. When Lin En changed his clothes and appeared outside the manor again in the image of Ladakh, a luxurious carriage had already stopped in front of the door. "Lord Ladakh, please. Lord North is waiting for you." The strong servant stretched out his hand to pull open the curtain of the carriage, bowed his head and said very respectfully. Lin En looked at him, nodded, opened the curtain and got into the carriage. The camel in front of the carriage quickly ran. The road in Yata harbor was very smooth. Lin En, who was sitting in the carriage, could not feel too much bumps, but he soon found that the direction of the carriage was heading directly out of the city. But that's right, the airship is not small in size. If it was made in Yata harbor, it would have been discovered long ago. Lin En remained calm and let the carriage go all the way. As the carriage went deeper and deeper into the suburbs, the road gradually became rugged and difficult to walk, but the carriage did not slow down, but instead accelerated. Finally, the carriage stopped at the bottom of a cliff by the sea. "Master Wizard, please come this way." The sturdy servant opened the door and made a gesture of invitation. Lin En nodded, jumped off the carriage, and walked into an abandoned cave at the bottom of the cliff under the guidance of the other party. After passing through a long tunnel, the view in front of him suddenly became clear. The interior of the mountain was actually an extremely vast space, and Lin En saw the huge airship placed in the center at a glance. Both the shape and size were exactly the same as the airship made by Lydia before, but the difference was that these wizards also made some magical modifications to it. The inner wall of the cabin was inlaid with pieces of metal plates with many strange runes painted on them. There was also a ferocious magic crystal cannon underneath. The muzzle was half a meter thick, which made people feel chilled. "Ladakh, look, this is our airship. What a magnificent creation." An old wizard with a thin face came over from the side, his face full of excitement. "This is the initiator of this action, North. That should be my airship." Lin En glanced at North, but he didn't mean to settle the score with him immediately, and asked instead, "So, have you found the secret of how this thing can fly?" Ralph only knew the blueprint of the airship frame, lacking the most important thing. "Of course, I tried dozens of times before I found the secret." North nodded, but he didn't mean to reveal it. Although this thing is destined not to be used in public, he spent several days researching it. Not to mention that this is related to a weakness of the airship, North naturally didn't want to reveal it casually. Lin En didn't continue to ask, but looked at the three people standing in front of the airship. Hank, Eva and Barbara. In the secret meeting of the small group a few days ago, Lin En had already figured out their names and identities through the conversations of several people. These people are three ring wizards and senior staff of Bloodthorn. If there is anything in common among these people, it is age. Even Eva, who looks the youngest, looks like she is already in her 40s or 50s. "When do we start the action?" The impatient Barbara saw that everyone had arrived, so she hurriedly asked. "Not now. This airship is too conspicuous. If we go out, I'm afraid it will be discovered by the cruising ships. We'd better wait until night." North shook his head. In fact, he was the most anxious one, but now he could only wait and urge the apprentices to move barrels of pungent liquid to the airship. P.S. Today is still the third update, and thank you for your subscription, reward, and voting support. Chapter 105. You'd better pray that we get luckier this time. At night, over the Iida harbor, a huge airship was slowly sailing towards the sea under the cover of darkness. "This height should be more than 1,000 meters, right?" Hank said with emotion, feeling the sea breeze blow in constantly. Looking from afar, he could even see the scenery of the harbor city below. "Almost no one should be able to find us at this height." North's expression also became more relaxed. Since this airship uses magical steam power to drive the propeller at the bottom, and is also equipped with windproof and stable alchemy arrays, the sailing speed is very fast. When the full moon hangs high in the sky, they have entered the range of the foggy sea. The vast fog surged up and soon occupied everyone's vision. Hank, Eva and Barbara looked heavy. They were all born in the land of wizards. Although they have learned about the foggy sea, it is the first time they have really faced it. Lin En turned his head to look at North, very curious about how the other party could find the so-called Eye of Death. When they reached the sea, North no longer hid it and immediately took out a wooden compass. Lin En recognized it at a glance. When they fled to the Sea of Misty Sea, Lord used a compass that looked similar to locate the location of the wizard land. Hank and others were puzzled, and North quickly explained, "This compass can locate nearby things with huge magic power. If the detection range is set to the maximum, it will always point to the Corona Tower in the Wizard City, so we only need to adjust the range to locate the location of the Eye of Death," North said, turning the top needle to adjust the positioning range of the compass to the minimum. The needle on the compass immediately turned and finally pointed to Lin En on the side. "I didn't expect that you, Radak, are the one with the most magic among us," Barbara said quite unexpectedly. Lin En didn't expect this either. He is not even a formal wizard now, but he soon realized that this should be the magic stored in the intelligent brain. Under the gaze of everyone, Lin En's mind changed, and he smiled grimly. "That's because I just developed some very interesting gadgets these days. If this operation is not smooth, you may have the opportunity to see its power." Lin En's words instantly diverted everyone's attention. Since the compass's magic detection can locate the Corona Tower, it obviously means that it detects not only its own magic, but also the total magic of the alchemical items on its body. Thinking of this, several people couldn't help but guess what powerful alchemical props Lacta had made during this period of time. North continued to increase the detection range of the compass. After expanding the range to 50 kilometers, the compass needle finally moved away from Lin En's body and pointed to the depths of the foggy sea. Lin En secretly breathed a sigh of relief. What he was most worried about was that the needle kept pointing at him, and then he really couldn't explain it. Fortunately, although the energy of the intelligent brain was replenished, the total amount only increased to about 30%, which was not stronger than the Eye of Death. After discovering the target, North immediately asked the apprentices in charge of controlling the airship to change the route and sail in the direction indicated by the compass. The distance of 50 kilometers is not too far for the speed of the airship, but the problem is that the Eye of Death seems to be moving constantly, so it has been sailing for most of the day and has not been able to catch up. Barbara and others' patience is also being worn out bit by bit. On the Sea of Fog, there is nothing but thick fog around. They can't even tell the current altitude. They can only tell whether it is day or night through light. By the way, North, our hunting of the Eye of Death will not have any impact on the protection of this sea area, right? Eva asked curiously with some impatience. "What do you think this thing is? A sea beast raised by the Parliament? A dog to guard our house?" North said with a sneer. "Don't be ridiculous. These terrifying monsters trigger the whirlpool to eat the living creatures in the nearby sea and devour their souls. Whether it's the church staff or us wizards, they are just food in their eyes. There is no difference from the fish in the sea. Maybe they taste better. If you have time to care about the Eye of Death, you might as well pray that we are lucky this time and don't encounter too powerful individuals," North said solemnly. Lin En looked at the foggy sky. The range of this legendary magic is larger than he imagined. He just doesn't know how high he needs to rise to get rid of the fog. 5,000 meters? 10,000 meters? As time passed, Lin En felt that the vastness of the foggy sea was more and more terrifying. He could vaguely feel that the target seemed to be very close. The sound of the rapids came from below, and North immediately ordered the apprentice to lower the altitude of the airship. Soon, the sound of the rolling seawater became louder and louder, as if it was constantly echoing in his ears. "The altitude is too low. Rise quickly," Lin En suddenly shouted. Hank and the others immediately looked down at the bottom of the airship. It was still thick fog, like a bottomless abyss, but a few seconds later, the sharp-eyed Barbara saw the faint waves. At this time, everyone realized that due to the low visibility, the airship had unknowingly lowered to a height of only a few meters from the sea level. "Did you hear me? Go up." North was also panicked, looking at the apprentice who was controlling the airship and shouted anxiously. At this time, a vague sound like a huge bell sounded in everyone's mind, and Lin En, Barbara, Hank and others immediately felt that their thoughts seemed to be affected. The apprentices who controlled the airship stood there in a daze, motionless, and kept muttering something. With a violent vibration, the airship had stopped on the water, like a huge ship, being dragged to the center of the vortex with the rolling water. The rolled-up seawater kept hitting the sides of the cabin, causing the entire airship to sway left and right. Damn it! North suppressed the discomfort in his brain and cursed angrily. He kicked away several apprentices who were standing there stupidly, and then held a pipe and madly converted the magic power in his body into hydrogen to replenish the airbag above. Lin En held the corner of the cabin tightly to stabilize his body, while an apprentice next to him was thrown out directly in the violent shaking. It was not until the turbulent water covered his mouth and nose that the wizard apprentice seemed to wake up, crying and struggling, but was swept into the water. Chapter 106. The Eye of Death falls into frenzy. Save me, Lord North. The apprentice who was thrown off the airship kept struggling and wailing, and was sucked into the turbulent whirlpool. Get up, North roared. After injecting enough hydrogen, the airship broke away from the water bit by bit, and flew up just before being sucked into the whirlpool. Seeing the airship break away from the water, everyone present breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. If they were sucked into the whirlpool, they would all die. North's hands and feet were trembling. After experiencing a life-and-death crisis, he didn't dare to hide it anymore. He quickly took out a palm-sized red crystal, and with a painful look on his face, he used the mage's hand to shoot it into the sky. After a moment, it suddenly exploded. A dazzling red light appeared, and the sky and the earth suddenly changed. The originally thick white fog dissipated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Lin En looked around. In just a dozen seconds, the thick fog of 2 or 3 kilometers had disappeared without a trace. Roughly estimated, the scope of the whirlpool should be smaller than the last time. Since there is such a useful thing, why didn't you take it out just now? Barbara asked with dissatisfaction. They almost died underwater just now. This is the bone marrow of the feathered serpent. It can temporarily neutralize the fog, but the range and duration are very limited. There is only this one, and it must not be used lightly, North said with a serious expression, and looked into the distance. Although the white fog nearby has been neutralized and dispersed, the fog in the distance is slowly gathering towards the center. They must not delay too long. Quick, move. Throw these things down. North called on everyone to throw the wooden barrels placed on the airship towards the center of the whirlpool. The wooden barrels filled with unknown liquid soon fell on the sea and flowed into the whirlpool along the water. Then Lin En was surprised to find that the originally turbulent water was slowly calming down. What is going on? Has the whirlpool calmed down? Hank and others were also surprised. But the next moment they found that they had thought too much. The extremely stable sea surface was like being boiled by a raging fire, and bubbles kept coming out. A moment later, a huge tentacle stretched out from the whirlpool, and then hit the sea surface heavily. The whole sea seemed to shake, and huge waves tens of meters high suddenly jumped up, and the waves rushed straight into the sky. The terrifying momentum was frightening. This was just the beginning. More and more huge tentacles stretched out from the bottom of the sea, covered with hideous barbs. Each barb flashed a cold blue light, which was obviously sharp, like several winding dragons rolling on the sea. North was so excited that he could not restrain himself. The information he got was correct. This thing really made the Eye of Death fall into a frenzy of losing reason. Take advantage of now, Hank. Adjust the muzzle and kill it. North looked at several people and shouted. If he could, he would like to do it himself. But apart from those unreliable apprentices, he is the only one who can fly an airship. Do we really have to fight? Hank looked at the furious Eye of Death below and swallowed his saliva. They seemed to have angered an existence that should not be provoked. North looked at Hank, who was hesitant and did not dare to take action. He wanted to kick him off the airship with one foot. He had to turn his head and look at Lin En and said, "It's up to you, Ladak." Lin En took a look at him and took over the position of the gunner directly. He moved the switch to adjust the angle of the magic crystal cannon. After about 3 seconds, he directly pressed the wrench. A large amount of materialized magic power condensed at the muzzle of the half-meter thick gun, and then with the roar that resounded through the world, a dazzling blue light burst out, and hit a certain place on the sea surface with destructive power. Boom! The violent explosion caused a chain reaction, and the sea surface sank instantly, but the next moment, a huge amount of seawater rushed in frantically. The power of the high-level magic crystal cannon was extremely amazing. Even the airship that was blessed with alchemical arrays such as stability, windproof, and rapidity was shaken under the strong recoil. However, this must-win attack was in vain. Except for the floating water splashes, nothing was hit. "Ladak, what did you do?" North said with great distress. This shot required the consumption of several high-quality magic stones, and the power was completely bought with money. Hank and Eva attacked Barbara and looked at Lin En with a strange expression. "The Eye of Death is so big, and it can miss." "Ahem, mistake. Try again," Lin En said with a little embarrassment. At such a long distance, he subconsciously aimed according to the parabola of the ballistic trajectory, but the cannon shot out of this thing was actually a straight line. In order to facilitate Lin En's aiming, North quickly lowered the airship to a height of 300 meters. This time, Lin En readjusted the trajectory of the magic crystal cannon. After a few seconds, another violent roar sounded, and the extremely bright blue light passed over the constantly swinging tentacles and hit a sea surface. Could it be that it missed again? This thought jumped into the minds of North and others, but they soon found out that they were wrong. As a large amount of seawater evaporated, a huge figure hidden under the sea surface appeared. The Eye of Death. Everyone present stared at this figure with wide eyes. The length of the figure alone was more than 20 meters. If the tentacles were included, it might break the record of 100 meters. The dark body was like cast steel, with a triangular head and a pair of scarlet eyes that were even more ferocious and terrifying. But before everyone could recover from the shock, another light of the magic crystal cannon appeared. Lin En actually launched another attack before the airship recovered from the violent shaking of the recoil. Before the displaced seawater rushed in, this attack directly hit the body of the Eye of Death. The dark, steel-like body was directly pierced by the dazzling beam, revealing a huge, bone-deep scar. A large amount of blood gushed out of it, dyeing the nearby sea surface dark green. The angry roar resounded through the sky, and the seawater began to churn as if it had come alive. Dozens of thick tentacles continued to stretch out and smash down, raising huge waves several feet high on the sea surface. However, the airship was too high, and no matter how big the wind and waves on the sea surface were, it could not cause any harm to Lin En and others inside. Even the roar that could affect the mind, after crossing a distance of 300 meters, the effect had become very weak. One after another, the magic crystal cannon fell on the sea surface, blasting scars on the huge body of the Eye of Death. If it were normal, even if there were magic crystal cannons that were strong enough to break through the defense, it would not be an easy task to severely injure a thinking beast. However, after swallowing the liquid in the barrel, the Eye of Death had lost its mind and could only keep waving its tentacles to attack distant enemies. Chapter 107, Random Bombardment. "That's it, kill it," North shouted excitedly. Hank and the others watched the terrifying beast on the sea struggling helplessly, and they were filled with excitement. They all saw how powerful the Eye of Death was. If they were to fight on the sea by boat, they would probably not be able to stop the three-ring mages. But now such a monster could only be ravaged to death by them without any resistance. Such a contrast even made them feel like they were dreaming. When the 13th magic crystal cannon was fired accurately, the body of the Eye of Death had been blown to pieces, and several tentacles that appeared on the sea had been broken. The sky was full of blood and debris, and the wide sea surface below had been stained with blood and completely changed color. However, the vitality of this thing was much stronger than everyone expected. Even under such an attack, it still did not die completely. It kept slapping the sea surface, and its huge body twisted wildly, and even began to consciously dodge the flying magic beams. The thick white fog gradually surrounded them, and visibility was reduced by half. It was obvious that the crystal of a feathered serpent bone marrow had limited power, and it could not hold on for just over 10 minutes. Lin En fired another magic crystal cannon, then turned to look at the few people watching and said, "North, the reserves of magic stones are running out. This won't work. You have to do something." Hearing this, Hank and the others looked at each other and nodded in unison. It had come to this point, and no one wanted this hunting operation to fail in the end. Thinking of this, the three of them raised their hands and began to cast spells and bombarded. All kinds of frost, fireballs, and corrosion spells were thrown down one after another, and they didn't care about the accuracy. Anyway, the bombing was done. Even North gave up the control of the airship, ran to the edge of the airship, condensed dozens of pyroblast spells, and smashed them towards the sea below. Under the continuous bombardment of the magic crystal cannon and several three-ring wizards, the Eye of Death finally couldn't hold on. Its huge body quickly flipped over the sea surface, stirring up countless waves. Its body was densely covered with burn marks, and then it didn't move at all despite the spells hitting it. Is it dead? North and others looked at the Eye of Death, which was no longer moving and whose body almost covered most of the sea surface. They couldn't help but hesitate. After all, the opponent's power was too terrifying. If they couldn't really confirm the opponent's death, the fear in their hearts would be difficult to dissipate. Lin En looked at the launch device in his hand. The magic power reserve inside the magic crystal cannon was almost gone, and it was not enough to launch the next attack. As everyone hesitated, the huge body of the Eye of Death gradually sank and slowly sank into the sea. North immediately became anxious. It was not easy to kill this giant beast. The initial investment alone cost thousands of magic gold coins to prepare various materials. If he let the body of the Eye of Death sink to the bottom of the water, he would go crazy. North rushed to the driver's seat and pressed the switch of the air valve. A large amount of hydrogen gushed out from the auxiliary airbag. The airship quickly lowered its altitude, and the wooden board at the bottom of the cockpit popped open with a bang. Unlike the airship made by Lydia, the bottom of the cockpit was not loaded with a sphere, but a giant hook that looked like an anchor, with many sharp barbs ranged on it. It was obviously a tool specially made for killing giant sea beasts. When the airship dropped to 50 meters in altitude, North, who could no longer hold back, launched the giant hook. With a whistling sound that broke through the air, the giant hook pierced straight into the huge body of the Eye of Death. The barb structure was deeply embedded in the skin and flesh, and the special rope connecting the middle collapsed tightly. The slow sinking trend of the Eye of Death stopped instantly, and North breathed a sigh of relief. Next, they just needed to drag this thing back slowly. Although such a large corpse had long exceeded the maximum load limit of this magic-modified airship, it could still be dragged with the help of the buoyancy of the seawater. The only thing that made North feel a little pity was that after a fierce bombardment, only half of the body of the Eye of Death was blown up, and a large amount of body tissue and most of the blood had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Lin En, who was standing by, vaguely felt that something was wrong, because when the claws entered the body just now, the body of the Eye of Death suddenly shook violently a few times, perhaps not just because of the impact. At the same time, a scarred tentacle suddenly rushed out from the dark green sea below and rolled on the thick rope. "It's plain dead, be careful," Hank shouted in panic, but it was obviously too late to remind him now. Under the horrified gaze of the crowd, the tentacle rolled up the rope and pulled hard, dragging the airship suspended in the air to the sea. The huge force made the airship tremble violently involuntarily, and the cabin made a creaking friction sound. "It's over. We're dead," Barbara screamed, her face flushed purple, and she tried her best to hold the edge of the airship, but she could only watch the airship fall, and below was the mouth of the Eye of Death, which was wide open and its tentacles were waving. It actually wanted to bind the entire cabin and swallow it directly. Lin En held the launcher of the magic crystal cannon tightly, staring at the tentacle dragging the airship. The magic power inside was not enough to launch the next magic crystal cannon. Under the life and death crisis, Lin En no longer reserved and added some of his own magic power. Nearly 60% of the magic power in the body was drained in an instant, and a magic crystal cannon that was only half the size of the original one was fired again, directly blowing the tentacle wrapped with the rope into two pieces. The violent shockwave generated by the explosion also caused the airship to deviate from its direction, avoiding the fate of being crushed and swallowed, but the fate of falling was still inevitable. Boom! The huge airship slanted and hit the sea surface directly, stirring up a wave several feet high. Under the huge impact, Lin En and others hit their heads on the wooden boards of the cabin. Since most of the cabin structure is made of wood, and the airbag is filled with hydrogen, the entire airship did not sink, but floated on the sea surface at an angle. Damn, this monster should have lost his mind a long time ago. North felt dizzy and cursed in anger and fear. But Lin En, Hank and others had no time to curse. because a huge tentacle smashed towards the airship from top to bottom. Chapter 108. 107 Since it wants to eat so much, let it eat. Ice curtain. Secondary, magic protection. Major armor, magic barrier facing the huge tentacles that were smashing over. The people present all used the strongest protective magic they had mastered. Several ice walls were first put in front of them, but the next moment they were instantly pierced like bubbles. Even the three-ring protective spell, the magic barrier, could not resist the angry eye of death, and it could not even last for 2 seconds before it was crushed like a dead tree. The tentacles soon hit the cockpit of the airship heavily, and the fine runes on the metal plate outside the cabin suddenly lit up. With a deafening sound, the outer shell of the airship suddenly dented, and the most critical magic crystal cannon was smashed to pieces. This was because the previous protective magic in the alchemical formation arranged on the airship blocked most of the power. Otherwise, relying on such a collision alone, the entire airship would be broken into 2 pieces in an instant. Everyone in the airship was being dizzy by this huge force. Until this moment, everyone realized the horror of the power of the Eye of Death. What made several people feel even colder was that the Eye of Death actually knew how to play dead and prioritize destroying the most threatening magic crystal cannon, which undoubtedly meant that the other party might have regained some of its sanity. However, the huge tentacle did not stop, and with a sweep, before everyone could react, it knocked Eva, who was on the far right, away. "No, Eva," Barbara shouted in horror, watching another tentacle rise from the bottom of the sea and beat Eva into a ball of meat. Seeing Eva die tragically on the spot, Barbara's eyes were red, and she gave up her defense and pointed at the tentacle. Ice breath. A strange cold current shot out, and the tentacles swaying near the cabin became extremely slow, and the crystal water droplets on the surface instantly condensed into ice. North and others who were familiar with Barbara immediately understood and practiced firing several pyroblasts. Under the attack of ice and fire, the huge tentacle was immediately blown into 2. "It can't hold on for much longer, kill it, otherwise none of us will survive," North roared loudly. With the obstruction of the Eye of Death, it would be extremely difficult for this airship to fly again. The only way to survive is to kill the other party directly. Everyone present understood this truth, but the Eye of Death still had 11 tentacles left, half of which had rolled onto the airbag of the airship, trying to drag the entire airship in. Hank cursed inwardly and raised his hand to condense multiple pyroblasts. At this time, North seemed to remember something and hurriedly interrupted. "Be careful, the fire magic must not hit the airbag." Hank and Barbara, who were preparing to cast a spell, were stunned for a moment. The entire airbag was very huge, standing horizontally between everyone and the Eye of Death. In this way, wouldn't it mean that they would be prohibited from using fire magic? Will this thing explode? Lin En immediately realized that the suspension gas used by this airship was probably hydrogen. "At such a close distance, it can blow us all to death," North said in fear. In fact, the airship under their feet was actually the second one they had made. As for the first one, due to the mistake of an apprentice, it had turned into a ball of fire, causing a large number of casualties. Therefore, when making the airship under their feet, he deliberately used fireproof materials to make the most important airbag, but it was definitely not able to withstand the overly powerful fire magic. However, after getting North's confirmation, an idea came to Lin En's mind. He immediately grabbed the pipe of the auxiliary airbag, converted the magic power in his body into oxygen and injected it into it, and then raised his hand to cast a spell, Magic Barrage. The next moment, dozens of magic missiles were suspended around Lin En, and then whizzed away. But the target was not the tentacles that kept waving, but the rope connecting the airbag and the cockpit. "What are you going to do?" Hank asked in astonishment. Lin's action was too fast, and no one had time to react. The airbag of the airship separated from the cockpit. "Our magic alone is not enough to kill the Eye of Death. Since it wants to eat this thing so much, why not let it eat it?" Lin replied calmly. Although they successfully blew off a tentacle just now, it was difficult to threaten the opponent's body. Only a terrifying weapon like the high-level magic crystal cannon could pose a big enough threat to the Eye of Death. With the high-level magic crystal cannon smashed, There was only one way to cause enough damage to the Eye of Death to be fatal. North instantly understood what Lin meant. While feeling a chill on his back, he also realized that this was indeed their only chance. North, Hank, Barbara, if you want to live, listen to my command later. There is only one chance. Lin looked at the two and said firmly. Hank and Barbara didn't understand what Lin En was saying at all, but they knew they couldn't think of any way to reverse the situation, so they nodded easily. In the short delay, the Eye of Death had already waved its tentacles to drag the huge airbag in front of it, just like a irritable child needing his toy, pulling the airbag a little out of shape. Although this thing affected their use of fire magic, it also blocked the Eye of Death's sight. The monsters that lived in the Sea of Fog for many years had never seen an airship. In its cognition, the airbag and the cockpit were integrated and could be eaten together. The Eye of Death obviously had good teeth, not to mention the airbag frame made of camel leather and the branches of the magic tongue tree. Even steel could be chewed to pieces. From now on, count to 3 seconds silently, and then everyone used the strongest fire magic. Seeing that the time was ripe, Lin En said loudly, approaching and casting magic barrage. Again, a large number of magic missiles appeared again and whizzed away. Every wizard knows this kind of basic magic, and as long as he doesn't show it too conspicuous, Lin En doesn't worry about his identity being suspected. Perhaps it sensed the danger, although the Eye of Death couldn't see the scene behind the airbag. The remaining tentacles were waving randomly, and some magic missiles hit the giant tentacles, corroding the surface with holes. It was obvious that the magic on the surface was just a disguise, and the interior was still filled with corrosive aqua regia. The remaining magic missiles hit the airbags together, and the gas in the main and auxiliary airbags gushed out immediately, and a large amount of hydrogen and oxygen drifted out and mixed together. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109, Ending the Eye of Death. To trigger a hydrogen explosion, the hydrogen in the air must be kept between 4% and 75.6%. To make the explosion the most violent, the ratio of hydrogen to oxygen must be kept at about 2 to 1. There is no doubt that Lin En did it. Although it is not a standard ratio, it is very close. Multiple pyroblast, North and others, who had been counting silently, had already taken action the moment the missile hit the airbag. Several three-ring wizards cast spells together. In an instant, dozens of violent fireballs whizzed in. After losing half of the protective circle used to break through the tentacles, they collided with the airbag. Boom! At this moment, the mixed gas was ignited suddenly, and the world seemed to shake. A huge explosion sounded through the sky, accompanied by a cloud of dust rising, and dazzling flames and violent shockwaves swept around. The Eye of Death, which had just bitten through the airbag, immediately tasted a taste it had never tasted in its life. Flames and explosions poured directly into its huge mouth. The damage from the internal explosion is often the most severe. Burning, pain, paralysis. It attacked from all parts of the body inside and outside. Almost in an instant, it felt as if it had turned into a red-hot iron block. It felt severe pain all over its body, as if something was tearing its flesh and blood, making it roar even more crazily. Lin En and others had no time to care about the Eye of Death at this moment, because the terrifying huge waves that came with the shockwave had swallowed up the cockpit. The devastated cockpit was hit into the sea by the huge waves more than 10 meters high, and Lin En, North, Hank and Barbara were no exception. The dark green seawater poured in from all directions, as if thrown into a drum. The constantly rolling water made everyone dizzy. When the cockpit resurfaced, everyone present was already wet and in a mess. Damn, no matter what you say next time, I will never be fooled by you again. Hank cursed angrily. He believed the North's evil and did such a deadly thing. Lin En immediately turned his eyes to the direction of the Eye of Death. This hideous beast was completely motionless. Its huge body was blown to pieces. Its tentacles were all blown off. Its body branches either sank to the bottom of the water or floated on the sea. Not even a third of its head was left, and its whole body was wrapped in blazing flames. It should really be dead, right? Barbara's face showed a little fear. If it can still survive like this, then I will walk backwards in the future. North spat and said viciously, and then checked the cockpit under his feet. Even though additional metal plates and protective alchemical arrays were installed on both sides of the cabin in advance, the damage to the entire cabin was still not optimistic, and the tail of the cabin was completely deformed. Fortunately, the convenience of magic was enough to solve this little trouble. Now the airbag of the airship was gone, and they could only use this thing as a boat and slowly drive back. Although he was full of confidence when he said it before, when he really sat in the cabin and approached, North's heart was also sweating, fearing that the Eye of Death would move again and attack them. However, all this did not happen. Everyone arrived in front of the huge corpse very smoothly. After extinguishing the burning flames, it was finally time to collect the spoils. The first is the spiritual essence in the brain, which is undoubtedly the most precious thing. The power of the Eye of Death even allows these spiritual essences to form crystals in the brain, about the size of a fist. Judging from the weight, it should be enough to brew more than 5 bottles of the source of magic power. What surprised Lin En was that after North got the crystal, he just threw it to him casually, and then eagerly used the carefully prepared bucket made of mithril to hold the blood of the Eye of Death. "Is this thing important?" Hank suddenly asked. Barbara on the side also looked over. Anyone could see that North valued the blood of the Eye of Death. It is even possible that North planned this hunting operation and spent countless energy just for this thing. This kind of blood is actually nothing special. It's just that the alchemy array I am studying happens to need this thing. North looked at the few people who surrounded him in a semicircular shape and said unhappily, "And it's scattered everywhere in the sea. You can catch it yourself if you want." However, Barbara and Hank were relentless. The blood in the seawater had long been diluted, and the effect was greatly reduced no matter what it was used for. They really risked their lives this time, and survived several near-death situations. They saw the power of the Eye of Death even more clearly, so they were very curious about North's purpose of collecting blood. "How about this? My reward can be halved, but you have to give us some of the collected blood," Hank suddenly proposed, and then looked at Lin En, who had not spoken. "What do you think, Ladak?" "Very reasonable." Lin En nodded and stood up. "You are asking for more. Don't forget that the airship, magic crystal cannon, and feathered serpent bone marrow used to hunt the Eye of Death were all bought by me at a great price." North rebuked with suppressed anger. Barbara's expression became a little embarrassed. "Don't say that, North. We just want to replace part of the reward with blood. You just need to give us a bottle of blood for research." Facing the pressure from the 3 people, North's face changed, but he had to compromise. Although they were all members of Crimson Thorns, to put it bluntly, they were just allies of interests. He consumed a lot of magic power in the battle just now. If several people attacked him together, he might really die here. Thinking of this, North had no choice but to take out a few empty potion bottles with a grim look, fill them with some blood, and then throw them to the 3 people. After Hank and Barbara took them, they looked towards Lin's direction intentionally or unintentionally. "The spirit of the Eye of Death is also a very precious thing. I am only responsible for making the potion, not for distributing it, but my share must not be touched." Lin naturally saw what the 2 were thinking, and said casually, kicking the ball back to North. He didn't care about empty promises. "You can buy it with money when the time comes," North said with gritted teeth. The 2 immediately stopped talking, and they didn't dare to continue to provoke North, lest this guy go crazy and want to die with them. P.S. 2 updates today. Although this plot is more critical, there may not be many people who like to read it, and the subscription results are also relatively poor. Wait for me to sort out the plot and make the progress of one section as fast as possible. But thank you all for your support, and continue to update 3 times tomorrow. Chapter 110, Weird Mouse Experiment. On the way back, because the airship turned into a ship, and they had to drag the remains of the giant beast, they drifted on the sea for 3 whole days. Because of the previous dispute, everyone was extremely vigilant along the way, and they didn't even dare to close their eyes when they slept. In this atmosphere of mutual fear, Lin En didn't mean to deliberately provoke a dispute. After all, This ship was too small. Once a fight broke out on it, it was very likely to damage the cabin or the compass in North's hand, and he would have to drift forever on the foggy sea. North, Hank, and Barbara obviously understood this, so even though the atmosphere was a little tense along the way, they still maintained a harmonious attitude on the surface. Until the evening of the fourth day, the ship took advantage of the night to return to the Wizard's Land. Finally back, stepping on the land, Barbara slowly breathed a sigh of relief, feeling that her legs were shaking. The foggy sea was too torturous. There was nothing there except white fog. Hank even cursed and said that he didn't want to take a ship to cross the sea again in his life. Anyway, everyone has worked hard on this trip. I will give you the things I promised you in a few days. North said tiredly. You'd better not delay too long. Barbara reminded him. The money for the purchase of the high-level magic crystal cannon was paid by her. It was not a small amount. North just nodded and agreed, and then ordered his men to arrange a few carriages to send them back to the city overnight. Lin En did not intend to delay and immediately returned to Lodic's manor. After returning to Lodic's castle, he asked Coleman and others to catch 100 mice for him to use in biological experiments. Such an order made Coleman dumbfounded. Where could he catch so many mice? In the end, he had to ask the apprentices who were doing the experiment to stop their work and catch mice in the castle. After working for half a night, they barely got half of them together, and they had to go to other places to catch them. Lin En soon realized the convenience of having a power. Whether it was the potion materials or the experimental mice, they were all gathered for him within a few hours. Taking advantage of this time, Lin En reviewed all the books about making the source of magic power in the secret room, and then took out the crystal taken out from the brain of the Eye of Death. The appearance of the crystal looked translucent, dark red, and covered with strange runes and patterns. One glance at it would make people sink into it, as if the soul was about to be absorbed into it. From the weight, it was only about 150 grams, very light. According to the records in Radak's notes, it usually takes 30 grams of spiritual essence as material to brew a source of magic power. In other words, this spiritual essence is only enough to make 5 source of magic power. At most. It looks like a lot, but if used for experiments, it is probably not enough. Lin En could only save as much as possible, and put equal amounts of salamander, griffin and death eye essence into the potion that had been brewed long ago, and made 3 bottles of source of magic power, of different colors. Then, with 0.5 milliliters as a unit, 9 gnats were arranged as experimental targets, and 3 gnats were grouped together to take the corresponding potion. Probably because there was too little, after waiting for a long time, it had no effect at all. According to the records in Lodic's notes, this thing should take effect within a few seconds. Lin En could only increase the dosage slowly until the total amount exceeded 2 milliliters. 3 of the gnats immediately moved and began to become more and more irritable. One of them even tried to bite through the cage. These gnats just took the potion brewed with the Death Eye essence. Lin En recorded all these changes and then divided the control group into groups. 3 mice in each group. 1 was dissected on the spot to record data, 1 was kept as it was, and the other continued to increase the dosage for experiments. 100 mice sounds like a lot, but in fact, it is not enough for a control experiment. In just one night, the materials on hand were almost used up. The wide experimental table was filled with mice with different deaths. Some were dissected by him, and the other part died suddenly after taking an overdose of magic potion. Among them, the mice that took the Eye of Death potion were the most terrifying. After drinking about 5 milliliters of the potion, their eyes began to turn red, and they screamed in a different way. Then they died without any warning half a minute later. What frightened Lin En the most was that he even felt like he was facing the Eye of Death when he was looked at by those red eyes. However, since he had killed the main body, Lin En was not afraid of a small mouse. He caught the last experimental subject, forced it to take 5 milliliters of magic potion, and then dissected it alive without waiting for it to die. Is there a strong magic reaction in the brain? Lin En discovered this unexpectedly. In fact, as long as the rat takes the potion, some magic reaction will appear in the brain. This is normal and also a characteristic of magical creatures, indicating that the formula is correct. However, This rat is a little different. The magic reaction in the brain is too strong, even reaching the level of the first ring of magic, which can only be described as exaggerated. Then the symptoms of brain death appeared. Lin En took Ladak's notes and checked them. He only found some records about brain death caused by taking potions. As for the reason why the rat's eyes were red and showed strong aggression, there was no mention. This may be the special nature of the Eye of Death. As a potion master, Lacta has a deep study of the source of magic. Of course, this guy is not as humane as him. He directly uses human bodies for experiments. Many of the missing poor people in the South City are related to this magic workshop. Lacta even used wizard apprentices for experiments and accumulated a lot of experience. What Lin En is doing is to confirm whether Lakota has played any tricks in the notes, and the strength of the Eye of Death. Judging from the state of the rat when it took the potion, the difference is probably more than 10 times. Such a strong effect makes Lin En a little worried. 30 grams of ectoplasm is the best ratio summarized by the alchemists of the parliament, which can maximize the effect of source of magic power, but too strong an effect may cause some side effects. The violent attitude of the rat before also made him very concerned. After thinking for a long time, Lin En finally decided to make a weakened version of source of magic power, and find someone to try it out. If there are no side effects, he will take the potion himself. Chapter 111 Untying the Heart Knot. The next day, at noon, Johnny, who had received the notice, knocked on the door. After getting permission, he pushed the door open and walked in. "Professor Lin En, you're looking for me?" The silver-gray-haired witch gently closed the door, holding the notes of the arcane subject in her hand, and asked coquettishly. Lin En was not in a hurry to talk about business, but looked at Johnny and asked curiously, "It's been so many days, don't you have anything to say to me?" Since coming to the wizard's land, he has done a lot of things, which is far from his original body. Carl, a nobleman who has only studied magic for half a year. Johnny's face showed a little hesitation, hesitant to speak, and finally shook his head and said very seriously, "If it weren't for you in Nordland, I'm afraid I would have died long ago." This is also the reason why she is willing to trust Lin En and keep his secrets for him. After all, the other party saved her twice. Lin En nodded, but soon asked again, "Just a few days ago, I received an invitation letter, which mentioned the name Carl, but I have never revealed your identity information to anyone else." Johnny frowned and said very confidently, but soon she found that her defense was very weak, because she was the only one who knew the other party's identity. The silver-gray-haired witch bit her lip, but she couldn't think of any way to prove herself. "I know it's not you." Lin En was not surprised by this. He still trusted Johnny. First, they were comrades in arms on the way to escape, and second, when he was in Harbor Town, the other party was willing to risk his life to rescue him from prison. In addition, the interests were tied together, and the possibility of betrayal was very small. "I'm just worried that someone will analyze something from what you said," Lin En explained, and then asked Johnny about those people he had met these days. And when he talked about the past of the Sekaz Empire, the silver-gray-haired witch thought and said that in the 2 months since she came to the wizard land, she had rarely gone out. She had only talked to the apprentices of Ida College, and she only said a few words because she was annoyed by the questions. And all of them were the excuses they had thought of in the Misty Sea. That is, after Kelu was captured, several of their apprentices, led by Lin En, barely managed to escape the pursuit of the church. However, except for the 2 of them, everyone else fell under the pursuit of the church. After careful questioning, Lin En finally had to give up the plan to find clues from Johnny, because there was nothing missing in the other party's words. "By the way, I asked you to come this time for another important thing." Lin En took out a bottle of dark red magic potion and placed it on the table. "What is this?" Johnny asked curiously. "Source of magic," Lin En said word by word. The silver-gray-haired witch's expression became extremely surprised. She looked at Lin En, and then turned her eyes to the bottle of dark red. Source of magic. The potion in front of her was undoubtedly something that any apprentice wanted very much. This was the certificate for promotion to a formal wizard. "If I'm not mistaken, your magic growth should have reached its limit, right?" Lin En asked. Johnny was different from him. Before entering the wizard's land, He followed Kelu to learn magic for 4 years. With his talent, he was probably very close to promotion. At first, Lin En planned to find an apprentice directly in the Lonic manor to do the experiment, but after thinking about it, it was too wasteful. Although this source of magic was a weakened version, with only 10 grams of Death Eye Spirit as an initiator, according to his calculations, the effect was still much stronger than the source of magic, made with those ordinary materials. He couldn't help an apprentice to be promoted and then kill him for the sake of keeping it secret, right? Although the wizard apprentices in the manor helped Tradak do a lot of dirty work, they had no grudges against him, so there was no need for them to do such things. Not to mention that the spirit of the Eye of Death was very precious. After some experiments and brewing 2 potions, there were only less than 50 grams left, so they needed to be used sparingly. Another point is that if the target is changed to Johnny, the identity problem will be easily solved. As long as the witch applies for graduation in a while, it will be approved by him and go through a little process. She can become a formal wizard recognized by the parliament. This potion is slightly different. I brewed it myself. The effect should be more powerful than the one issued by the parliament, and the probability of promotion is also higher. But I am not 100% sure. There may be side effects. In short, everything is unknown. If you don't want to take risks, forget it. Lin En explained the pros and cons very concisely, and did not intend to deceive the other party to take the medicine. However, Johnny's attention was not on this, and he did not ask what the so-called side effects were. He took a deep breath and suddenly asked, "So, you're not a formal wizard yet, right?" She wasn't stupid. Of course she could guess the purpose of Lin En taking out the source of magic. Lin En fell silent and didn't answer. The title of wizard apprentice would be taken off his head from tomorrow. But sometimes silence is also an answer. Johnny immediately realized that she guessed right, and the doubts in her heart disappeared instantly. These days, what she found most strange was that Lin En's promotion speed was too exaggerated. If Lin En was really a 3-ring magician, then the so-called super genius of the wizard land, Magic Star, Ogster, would not even be worthy of carrying his shoes. But now it seems that they are all just wizard apprentices. Lin En should have used other means to release powerful magic. This is not impossible. For example, he can use the power of Magic Hand to use 1-ring upper magic 5 times a day. If Lin En was appreciated by a great wizard or even a legendary wizard in that secret law society, it would be normal for him to obtain several alchemical items that can cast 3-ring magic. Thinking of this, Johnny picked up the source of magic on the table, and drank it without hesitation out of trust in Lin En. Compared with the extremely small probability of side effects, she was more interested in the higher probability of promotion mentioned by Lin En. No apprentice dared to say that he would definitely be able to cross this chasm. The slightest improvement is very important. Lin En stared at Johnny's changes. He asked someone to experiment. The second important reason was to see what the promotion process was like and whether there was anything he could learn from it. Chapter 112. I call it Antimatter Annihilation Cannon. At the moment of drinking the potion, a strong wave of magic appeared around Johnny, and the magic power in her body seemed to boil. Then the witch's expression gradually became painful. She closed her eyes, and beads of sweat oozed from her forehead, as if she was struggling. Lin En looked at her nervously, and did not dare to disturb Johnny, who was still in the state of breakthrough, let alone help, so he could only wait quietly for the effect of the potion to end. About 3 minutes later, the wave of magic power that appeared around her body gradually subsided, and Johnny slowly opened his eyes. His body swayed and he almost fell to the ground. "How is it? Did it work?" Lin En reached out to steady Johnny and asked hurriedly. The silver-gray-haired witch did not answer, but stretched out her hand, and several hot fireballs appeared around her body, constantly rotating around her body. Casting without the help of any materials is the sign of a formal wizard. "I succeeded." Johnny showed a very touching smile on her face, like a child who found a favorite toy. After extinguishing the fireball, she began to experiment with other magic. Flame, frost, poisonous fog, This is completely different from the feeling of using materials to cast spells on weekdays. It is a qualitative leap from an apprentice to a formal wizard. Lin En could understand the witch's excitement, so she didn't rush to ask until she was tired of playing. "How is it? Is there anything you are not used to? Did you encounter any obstacles when you broke through?" If there are any obstacles, Johnny pondered for a while, then suddenly frowned and spoke. "It's just that the potion you brewed is quite unpalatable." Lin En was obviously stunned for a moment, and a look of laughter and tears suddenly appeared on his face. After teasing Lin En for a while, the silver gray-haired witch stopped joking and explained the feeling after taking the medicine. "The main thing is to transform the body and enhance the spirit, and it is accompanied by severe pain, which is unbearable, but as long as you can get through it, it will be fine." And the so-called side effects, she didn't notice it at all. As for the breakthrough, it was a very refreshing feeling. Johnny racked his brains, and really didn't know what adjective to use. After learning about the breakthrough process from Johnny, Lin En was reassured that at least the formula of the potion was accurate. However, in order to avoid some emergencies, Lin En did not choose to break through in Yaita College. Instead, after sending Johnny away, he returned to the secret room in Lodic. It was very hidden here, and there was no need to worry about anyone disturbing him. Lin En took out a perfectly prepared source of magic, and drank it in one gulp. The dark red liquid flowed down his throat. As soon as he took a sip, Lin En understood why Johnny said that the potion was unpalatable, because the taste was indeed hard to describe. He could not feel any heat when holding the potion bottle, but when he drank it, he felt like sticky magma was poured directly into his mouth. Then there were waves of tingling and burning sensations from all parts of his body, and the whole person seemed to be in a boiler, but it was not the body that was burned but the soul. Lin En's body was shaking constantly, his teeth were creaking, veins were popping up all over his body, his face was flushed, and fine sweat was constantly coming out of his forehead. Although he had expected the horror of the potion before, he had never imagined that the effect would be so overbearing and fierce. An inexplicable force was constantly eroding his body, and finally rushed straight into his brain. At that moment, his brain seemed to explode, and Lin En lost consciousness for a short time. When he came to his senses again, his body had appeared in another place. In front of him was an endless sea, and he was standing on the sea at this moment, swaying constantly with the rolling waves. When he realized this, Lin En's body sank, and the surging sea water squeezed in from all directions. But before he could react, his body was pushed up by a sticky thing. Lin En looked down and found that it was a huge tentacle that lifted him up. On the sea surface below, a hideous and huge figure has emerged, exuding a suffocating might. The red eyes stared at him, and the pupils were filled with anger and hatred. The Eye of Death. The moment Lin En looked into the eyes of death, his body felt like it fell into an ice cellar, and he froze in place. Then he felt the tentacles wrapped around him suddenly pinched, and his body was actually crushed. Blood spilled on the sea surface, and the flesh and blood fell into the ocean, and soon disappeared. But the next second, Lin En's body reappeared on the sea surface. He had figured out that he was in the world of thought at the moment. Perhaps the magic potion he had just taken stimulated the power too perfectly, so powerful that the Eye of Death could condense a physical entity directly in his consciousness. Just as he was thinking, the sea water under his feet rolled endlessly, but another tentacle pulled towards him from under the sea surface. This time, Lin En flew directly up. He imagined that there was a lot of helium holding up his body, and he was directly suspended in the air hundreds of meters high. Although being killed would not really kill him, the pain was no less. More and more tentacles rose from the sea, twisting madly, changing various postures, and extending continuously as if there was no upper limit to their length, as if they were going to entangle Lin in the sky and drag him into the deep sea to drown. Fuck. Lin cursed inwardly. The Eye of Death actually thought its tentacles were really that long. After raising his height again to avoid the whipping of a tentacle, hundreds of white phosphorus fireballs the size of a human head appeared around Lin, crashing into the Eye of Death, turning the entire sea surface into a sea of fire. The angry sea beast kept roaring, and its huge body and tentacles exposed on the sea surface were soon covered by flames. However, This level of attack was far from enough. It was not only Lin who would not die in the sea of consciousness. The completely enraged Eye of Death roared and roared, and its 100-meter-long body actually jumped directly from the sea surface and flew into the sky. Lin was stunned, and then he realized that his thinking was too rational and not bold enough. In this strange space, maybe we can try something that we can't do in the real world. Lin En raised his hands high. His left hand continuously produced hydrogen atoms, and a large number of anti-hydrogen atoms emerged from the palm of his right hand. He bound the two with magnetism in two huge magic balls, and then threw them together at the flying Eye of Death. I call it Antimatter Annihilation Cannon. Chapter 113 Breakthrough to become an official wizard. The so-called antimatter, as the name implies, is the opposite state of normal matter. When positive and negative matter meet, the two sides will annihilate each other, causing an explosion and generating huge energy. Its power lies in the fact that the mass-energy conversion ratio produced by annihilation is close to 100%. In contrast, the mass-energy conversion ratio of a hydrogen bomb is only about 0.7%. In the face of the power of the annihilation of positive and negative matter, the so-called nuclear energy is not worth mentioning at all. The flying Eye of Death immediately felt this fatal crisis, not only the demise of the body, but also the annihilation of the soul. Countless tentacles like pillars of heaven whipped past, but the two magic balls had already collided. Space and time seemed to have stopped, and there was only endless light and heat left in front of Lin En. That was a light that was tens of thousands of times brighter than the sun, and the heat generated could only be counted in hundreds of billions. Everything lost its meaning under such a terrifying energy explosion. The huge Eye of Death and countless tentacles like sea pillars were all annihilated within 1/100th of a second. Then the entire ocean, the seabed rose rapidly. Hundreds of millions of tons of seawater evaporated in an instant. The energy waves and high-energy rays generated by the explosion spread in all directions, and the entire space trembled violently, until a slight sound sounded in the space. Under the cover of the violent explosion, it was very accurately transmitted to Lin En's ears, as if it was heard by the soul. That was the consciousness space shattering, and the fine cracks continued to spread like a spider web. But this was also Lin En's last thought. The terrifying energy wave had already rushed towards him, and the whole process was not painful at all, because the annihilation of the body was in an instant. The vast consciousness space was also completely shattered under the impact of the energy wave, and the remaining energy was integrated into Lin En's body. The solid barrier that blocked the growth of magic power was now easily broken through like paper. Lin En felt that every cell in his body was cheering, and the total amount of magic power was rapidly rising. The brain became extremely clear, although it was not as good as the improvement in overload mode. But the computing power was also increased several times. The elements became clearer and clearer in his perception, and he could control them at will. If he had to rely on the power of his brain to release white phosphorus, hand of the flame demon, and liquid nitrogen, ice field, before, he could now completely rely on his own strength to release these magics, and the growth of magic power continued, and he even directly crossed the second obstacle, and directly upgraded from an apprentice to a second-ring wizard. Lin En sensed that the magic power reserve had increased by more than 10 times compared to before. The power of the Eye of Death can be seen. My physical fitness has also improved. Lin En clenched his fists and tried to jump a few more times. The cells in his body were demonized to a certain extent. It's just that the proportion of demonization is not high. This should not be a benefit unique to him. When he was doing the double ball experiment before, he found that the wizards who moved the iron balls were stronger than each other. After spending 10 minutes getting used to all kinds of magic, Lin En finally let go of the worry he had been holding. After entering the land of wizards, he was most worried that his identity as an apprentice would be exposed. Now this biggest shortcoming has been made up. No one can question his identity anymore. The next step is to verify whether Lakota's conjecture is correct. Lin En opened his notes and quickly found the records about psychic magic, soul scream, flesh reorganization, rotten body, dead spirit manipulation. Soul scream is undoubtedly the psychic magic that Lin En is most familiar with, but now there is no target to attack, and there is no way to test the actual effect. Flesh reorganization, rotten body, and the like are all means of making corpses, and he doesn't plan to do this. After seeing the relevant records of dead spirit manipulation, Lin En suddenly had an idea and asked in his mind, 071. Can you release the unknown energy you stored before? It is estimated that 1% of the energy will be consumed to maintain the energy body. No problem, do it, Lin En said without hesitation. After becoming a formal wizard, he no longer cared so much about the energy reserves of the intelligent brain. After all, it is not used on weekdays, and it can always be stored slowly. After Lin En spoke, a faint blue fluorescence floated out of his body and gradually condensed into a shape 1 meter away from him. It was a girl of 13 or 14 years old, with an illusory figure, flowing like water waves. Because they were both psychics, the girl's body seemed to Lin En to be much more solid than the short and fat apprentice and the severely injured Latak. He could even distinguish the facial features and the clothes he was wearing. White dove? Lin En asked tentatively. His premonition was indeed correct. The unknown energy body collected by the intelligent brain before was undoubtedly the other party's soul. The girl slowly opened her eyes, her pupils full of confusion and bewilderment. Her consciousness seemed to be still at the moment of death, and she murmured something vaguely. I don't want to die. Lin En understood what Beige wanted to express, and there was a little helplessness on her face. The 13 or 14-year-old girl seemed to have come to her senses at this moment. She shrank in fear and looked at the unfamiliar space around her. When she saw Lin En, she seemed to have found her backbone. She subconsciously floated over and reached out to grab the corner of his clothes. However, this action was empty, and the illusory palm went straight through the clothes. Beige was obviously stunned for a moment, and then she realized that her body was a little strange, transparent and illusory. She realized that she was dead. The witch's face suddenly showed a timid and helpless expression, and her eyes were filled with crystal tears. If she was still alive, the tears would have fallen from her eyes long ago. Well, actually, you are not dead. You can only say you have changed your way of living, Lin En said in a very tactful way. Unfortunately, his comfort obviously had no effect. The crystal tears on Beige's face immediately slid down, but before they hit the ground, they turned into dots of fluorescence and dissipated in the air. The sound of crying was also intermittent and erratic, which made people shudder. Lin En suddenly had a headache. He was the worst at comforting others, not to mention that the other party was a ghost. In the end, he had no choice but to tell Beige that her body was still there. When he figured out how to put a soul into a body, maybe he could bring her back to life. Chapter 114 I'm afraid we are all being used as knives. With Lin En's not-so-good consolation, Beige finally stopped crying, and then looked at him eagerly, with a pitiful look. Well, don't resist first, I'll do a little experiment. Lin En took a few steps closer, put his hand on Beige's head, and then penetrated his mental power into the spirit body. This is exactly how the psychic witchcraft, dead soul manipulation, is used. A look of fear and uncertainty suddenly appeared on the girl's face. She could feel that something seemed to be pouring into her body. She instinctively wanted to resist or escape, but thinking of Lin En's instructions, Beige still endured it, but closed her eyes tightly, looking like she was ready to die. This feeling is very wonderful. When the spell was completed, Lin En immediately found that he seemed to have an extra body that he could control at will. With a thought, the illusory girl beside him raised her hand, and then turned around a few times. Beige also found that she had lost control of her body. As she had learned psychic magic, she naturally understood what was going on. She immediately stared at Lin En with a very resentful look, looking like she was about to cry. Seeing this scene, Lin En, who had planned to weigh the girl's spirit, had to give up. However, as soon as he let go of control, Beige turned into a faint blue spiritual light and crashed directly into his body. The prompt sound of the intelligent brain rang again. Special energy body has been absorbed and can be converted into 12% energy reserve. Do you want to use it immediately? No, Lin En responded hurriedly, and then he was a little amused. In order to avoid his experiment, Beige chose to return to the reserve pool of the intelligent brain, but he didn't know that it was the most dangerous place. In other words, The intelligent brain has become the spiritual support of Beige. Lin En immediately thought of this problem, because the soul body cannot exist independently from the body. Even a three-ring wizard like Ladak needs to make a soul container for himself. But now it might be better to describe this situation as restraint. Let's name this energy soul power, Lin En said thoughtfully. Loaded into the database. Although the soul body experiment ended just after it began, Lin En still obtained some information. First of all, as Ladak guessed, the potion brewed with the Eye of Death can indeed make people become psychics. Secondly, it is psychic magic. This power beyond his cognition is very strange and powerful, but it is also extremely dangerous to use. For example, when controlling the soul body, once the white pigeon makes a resistance, he must use more soul power to suppress the other party, otherwise the controlled soul body may break free, and he will also suffer a lot of backlash. This is probably the reason why Lacta did not dare to control too many corpse ghosts at one time in the secret room. So compared with the ability to control the dead, Lin En is more interested in another use of this magic, which is to control some creatures with weak soul power. When in Harbor Town, White Dove had controlled a group of great crows to get information. This was a bug-level ability to get information. The only drawback was that controlling creatures would distract one's attention, a bit like controlling multiple units at the same time in a game. Too many units would inevitably affect the ability to control each unit. Lin En continued to look through Radak's notes. Although he did not intend to use some of the insidious psychic magic, only by understanding it clearly could he understand how to deal with it. In the next few days, Lin En, who had completed the promotion, put all his energy into condensing spells, especially protective spells, to improve his strength as much as possible. He did not forget that he had promised to hand over the remaining source of magic. Lin En naturally had no intention of keeping his promise. They had not yet settled the account of the airship. However, the development of the matter was somewhat beyond his expectations. Before he could do anything, Barbara and Hank had already come to the door. "Are you saying that North's recent state is a little bit wrong?" In Radak's manner, Lin En asked in surprise after listening to the two people's complaints. Hank nodded. According to what they had agreed before, after the hunting operation, North should pay him 1,000 magic gold coins as a reward, as well as a part of the body tissue of the Eye of Death that had been decomposed. However, it had been almost 3 days, and the other party had not made any move. The apprentice he sent to urge him even reported that North was not at the base outside the manor and the harbor town. This made him have some bad associations. "I'm afraid North is not going to pay us," Barbara said angrily. In her opinion, North must have suffered heavy losses in the hunting of the Eye of Death, so he simply gave up and kept dragging it out. They came to Lin En this time to unite the front and make trouble at the promotion ceremony of Bloodthorn. The day after tomorrow. Lin En looked at the two people in front of him with a strange expression. When Lin En first heard about this organization, he was still very worried. After all, the entire Bloodthorn was very large and the personnel composition was complex. But now it seemed that the whole thing was a mess, and each member was completely looking after themselves. Of course, this was probably related to the fact that they had a very unhappy time hunting for the Eye of Death. North had spent so much effort, but in the end, he only got the bloody part of the Eye of Death, and was forced to give up some of its blood. He must have felt resentful. Lin En was naturally happy to see such a scene, and it would be even better if they could fight directly. Thinking of this, Lin En said with anger, "I'm afraid it's not that simple. I think you should all remember how much North values the blood, and it can even be said that he is willing to do something with it. He must be eager to do something with it, hiding it from all of us. Maybe from the beginning, he didn't even think about paying the so-called reward. I'm afraid we were all used as knives." As he spoke, Lin En was stunned for a moment and became a little suspicious, because he suddenly felt that his analysis seemed to make sense. North was too generous, to an outrageous degree. For example, North was willing to spend several times the market price to buy the high-level magic crystal cannon that Barbara got. That's 4,000 magic gold coins, which is more than the combined wealth of many three-ring wizards. There's also the spirit of the Eye of Death. Although Radak is the only one among them who knows how to make the source of magic power. After North threw it to him, he didn't ask any more questions. Barbara and Hank looked at each other, with doubts in their eyes. There's probably only one thing that a three-ring wizard would be willing to do with his entire fortune. P.S. Angels only have 5 days off for National Day. I have to go to work today, so there are only 2 chapters. I'll continue to update when I have time or when I'm on holiday. Chapter 115. He wants to become a great wizard? Barbara said in shock, and then a trace of desire appeared on her face. This is undoubtedly the dream of every three-ring wizard. There are thousands of formal wizards in the entire wizard land, but only a few dozen can truly become great wizards. But the question is, how to do it? Just rely on the blood of the Eye of Death? This is just our guess. Hank was a little more rational. If promotion was really that easy, they would not have wasted so many years as three-ring wizards. Whether it is a guess or not, I have to ask North clearly, Barbara said excitedly. North, like them, is a person with ordinary talent and has no hope of breaking through to the great wizard in this life. If the other party can be promoted in this way, then I think I can too. Ask. How to ask? Lin En said with a sneer. Barbara's face suddenly turned livid. According to Hank, North is now impossible to find anyone. It is very likely that he is deliberately hiding from them and secretly carrying out some plan. What she was more worried about was that by the time she found him, North might have already made a breakthrough, and then they would be at an absolute disadvantage. Perhaps we can find some helpers. Hank couldn't help but come up with a vicious plan in his mind. There were more than 1 or 2 three-ring wizards who wanted to be promoted to great wizards. In a sense, they had many allies. Since North was hiding so much, maybe the promotion method he used was not a proper one. They could use this to threaten North to give them a copy of this method, otherwise they would let their confidants spread this matter to the entire wizard land. For a possible promotion method, Hank and Barbara came up with vicious plans frequently, even with a bit of madness. Hearing this, Lin En broke out in a cold sweat, and a hint of pity appeared in his eyes when he looked at the two. Although Hank and Barbara were three-ring wizards, at this moment, they were almost no different from those apprentices who worked hard to be promoted to formal wizards. But this is the cruelty of the wizard world. Each level of division represents power and power. After discussing various ways to interrogate North and establishing a temporary alliance, Hank and Barbara couldn't wait to say goodbye and leave. They were all anxious to go back and study the bottle of blood they got on the Sea of Mist to find out what was so special about it. After the two left, Lin En thought about it and took out a bottle of reagent containing dark green liquid. In the past few days, he naturally did some research on the blood of the Eye of Death, but the results of the experiment were very bad. The power contained in this blood was very strange and had a strong rejection, so it could not be used to brew the shaping potion at all. Those rats that took the blood directly died inexplicably after just a few seconds, and even the dissection of the body could not find any reason. Lin En suddenly thought that North had said that this blood was used in a certain alchemy array. Maybe he could start from this. While studying secretly, Lin En did not forget that he was still a professor teaching. In fact, his 1-week vacation was over. Facing the reopened mathematical Olympiad class, all the wizard apprentices were both looking forward to it and having a headache. During the period when the mathematical Olympiad class was suspended, they were all studying the homework left by Lin En, which contained all kinds of strange questions. For example, a wizard raised many chickens and rabbits in a cage. There were 35 heads and 94 feet. How many chickens and rabbits were there in the cage? Another example was that another wizard spent 10 silver coins to buy a camel beast, sold it for 12 silver coins, and then bought it back for 15 silver coins, and sold it to another person for 20 silver coins. How much did he earn? In addition, there were snails running on the tree for a while and resting for a while, frogs that wanted to jump out of the well but always slipped down, carpenters who couldn't figure out how to match keys and locks, and the shadow area of the intersection of two squares, etc. Elok really couldn't figure out how Professor Lin En's brain was built, and why there were so many strange questions. And are those wizards from the secret society crazy? Why must chickens and rabbits be kept in the same cage? He insisted on counting heads and legs to determine the number. If he had the time, he would have separated the chickens and rabbits. Very good. It seems that you all have mastered it very well. Lin En took a rough look at the homework he collected. Although there were many questions, they were all the most basic knowledge of solving equations and geometry. It was just that there were more ways to ask questions. They were all classic test questions that he searched for in his brain. It must be said that the brains of these wizard apprentices are much better than ordinary people. Alok, Johnny and others are worthy of being students in the elite class. In just 2 months, they have already mastered some basic knowledge. After hearing Lin En's words of praise, all the apprentices showed joy on their faces, especially Pierce, as one of the apprentices who has been enrolled in Yayata College for the longest time. His magic power is already overflowing, but he has no talent in elements, alchemy, potions and plasticity, so he was forced to stay in the college. But the Olympiad mathematics subject was different. Although his talent was not as good as that of Alok and Johnny, he was much better than others. This was his only hope for graduation. Professor Lin, have we finished this Olympiad mathematics course? Pierce asked excitedly. It's still far from it. What you are learning now are the basics of the basics. Lin shook his head and said with a smile, is this still the basics? Alok, Pierce and others were a little bit unbelievable. They thought they had learned everything they could. After all, they now mastered various calculation methods such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponentiation, square root, etc., and can also accurately calculate the length, width, height and surface area of various complex objects. They even knew how many days it took for the lazy snail to climb the wall and how many times the frog needed to jump to pick out a deep well. They could also calculate the strange chicken and rabbit in the same cage. What else can be learned? In trigonometric functions, probability, linear algebra, plane vectors, inequalities, infinite series, etc. Have you mastered all of these? Lin En asked with a smile. Lin En's iconic smile made the apprentices present shudder, and these words made them even more confused. The only thing they knew was the trigonometric function. Trigonometry. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116. This is the power of the combination of Olympiad mathematics and magic. Professor Lin, what's the point of learning these? Alok asked weakly. If it's just to exercise brain power, Alok thinks exponents, square roots and solving equations are enough, which is already torturous enough. Lin looked at the people who were equally confused and said with a smile, aren't you always curious about how Olympiad mathematics should be combined with magic? Are you going to teach us about magic in Olympiad mathematics? Deborah exclaimed. All the wizard apprentices looked at Lin expectantly. They still remembered the terrifying ice magic that the professor had used in the training ground before. They almost froze their arms just by touching the aftermath of magic. I heard that this was the magic that Professor Lin improved by himself. Lydia pouted and kicked the table in frustration, because among all the people, only she couldn't learn magic. You can say that. Lin nodded, and then asked everyone to leave the classroom and go to the more open outdoors. After everyone stood still, Lin En looked in the direction of the Screaming Tower, then raised his hand and began to measure. What is the professor going to do? Blow up the entire Screaming Tower? Alok asked quietly. How is this possible? Pierce curled his lips. This Screaming Tower is the landmark building of the entire Ida harbor. How can it be demolished just like that? But seeing Lin En's serious look, Pierce became a little uncertain. It shouldn't be that serious, right? Under everyone's attention, 12 magic missiles appeared around Lin En, and then rushed towards the Screaming Tower, with a whistling sound. When everyone saw that Lin En was only using magic missiles, they were a little disappointed, but they still stared at the trajectory of the magic missiles. Is he going to attack the top of the tower? Alok looked up high, but to his surprise, the trajectory of the 12 missiles formed a parabola and directly passed over the top of the tower that was tens of meters high, then fell downwards, and finally disappeared directly from everyone's sight. The field suddenly fell into a dead silence, and everyone's expressions were very strange. Alok and Deborah even covered their mouths to prevent themselves from laughing out loud. A mistake. This is definitely a mistake, right, Professor Lin? It should have been just a demonstration just now, right? Do you want to do it again? Johnny kindly made up for it, so as not to embarrass Lin too much. However, Lin's expression did not change at all. He glanced at the apprentices who were holding back their laughter, and then looked at Alok and Deborah who were holding back their laughter in the front row, and said casually, "Alok, Deborah, go to the training ground and bring the training dummies over." "Okay, Professor." Alok was holding back very hard, and after receiving Lin's order, he immediately ran, and finally couldn't help laughing until he was out of Lin's sight. "Ha ha ha." I didn't expect Professor Lin to be so embarrassed. Deborah also laughed. There was no way. In the past, Professor Lin always looked calm and composed, as if everything was under control. But today, such a teaching accident happened. It was really funny. "Let's go quickly, don't let the professor wait." Anxiously, after laughing, Alok quickened his pace. He felt that the magic missile released by the professor must not be that simple. It was just a mistake. He also wanted to see what it would be like to combine Olympiad mathematics with magic. The training ground was far away from the classroom of Olympiad mathematics. It was located at the corner of the entire college. This was for safety reasons to avoid some magic accidents. When the two arrived at the training ground, they were surprised to find that many people were gathered here. When they squeezed in, they were immediately stunned, because in front of them was a whole row of headless training dummies. 12, exactly 12, Deborah counted, and then an extremely ridiculous idea suddenly popped up in her mind. Alok also thought of this, turned his head and looked at several apprentices beside him, and asked anxiously, "Daka, what happened to these dummies?" "We don't know either. Just now when we were practicing magic, several magic missiles suddenly fell from the sky and hit the heads of these training dummies, which scared us all." Daka also had a confused expression on his face. "The sky? Do you know which direction this thing came from?" Alok asked hurriedly. "It should be over there." Daka pointed behind him. Alok and Deborah looked at each other, and their expressions changed immediately, because behind them was the towering, screaming tower. Could it be that Professor Lin En was in front of the classroom of the Olympiad mathematics subject, across an entire tower, across a distance of hundreds of meters, and with no vision at all, he accurately hit the training dummies that could be located on the training ground? How is it possible? What on earth is going on? Daka and others gathered on the training ground, looking at the two people's startled appearance, couldn't help but ask, "If I'm not mistaken, this was probably done by Professor Lin." Alok swallowed his saliva and said in disbelief. The two realized at this time that Lin did not ask them to move the training dummies over to experiment with magic, but to take these damaged dummies back to show the effect. At the same time, Lydia and others waiting in front of the classroom were already a little impatient. Where did Alok and Deborah go? They just took a few training dummies. Why haven't they come back for so long? Are they trying to make the professor look bad on purpose? This is too bad, Pierce secretly complained in his heart, but a smile could not help showing at the corner of his mouth. Who made the professor always like to come up with some weird math problems to embarrass them? Just thinking about it, Pierce saw Alok and Deborah, leading Daka and others to come over together, each holding two headless training dummies in their hands, looking particularly terrifying. Then, without waiting for them to ask, Deborah immediately came to Lin and asked with great curiosity, "Professor Lin, how did you do it? This is incredible." "What's so incredible?" Pierce couldn't help but interrupt. Alok didn't mean to keep them in suspense, and quickly told them what they saw on the training ground. Daka and the others also talked about how the magic missiles fell from the sky and smashed the dummy's head when they were practicing magic. Chapter 117 Lin En, time is running out. Let's get down to business. After listening to the stories of several people, Pierce and others were a little bit unbelievable, and even suspected that Alok was fooling them. The classroom of the math department is a full 600 meters away from the training ground, and there's a screaming tower several tens of meters high between them. How can it be hit? But the testimony of the 12 training dummies whose heads were smashed and Daka and others told them that all of this was true. The puzzled apprentices had no choice but to look at Lin En together, waiting for his answer. It's very simple, as long as you know all the data and calculate them, isn't it? Lin En said with a smile. During the time he was a professor, he had already used the intelligent brain to record every location of Yaita College. So the location information of each training dummy was very clear. He only needed to construct the corresponding parabolic trajectory equation and then make fine adjustments based on interference factors such as wind speed. For the same attack, I can also replace it with fireball, pyroblast or even more powerful magic, Lin En added. Elok and the others couldn't help shrinking their necks. No one wanted to be walking one day and a big fireball fell from the sky and hit their heads. This was so terrible that they didn't even know how they died. Professor Lin, is this the magic skill you have developed this week? Tick, who had been listening, asked in surprise. You can say that. Lin shrugged. He was just worried about how to explain that he had asked for a week off for no reason. Professor, when can we learn such magic? Deborah raised her hand high and asked curiously. Since you want to learn so much, I will organize an exam for the Olympiad Mathematics at the end of this month. If someone can answer all the questions correctly, I will make an exception and teach him this improved magic, and even allow him to apply for graduation in advance, Lin said to the apprentices. However, there was no intention to deceive him. He didn't expect these wizard apprentices to master any profound mathematical knowledge. As long as they could learn most of the knowledge in elementary and junior high school, they could apply for graduation. After all, after becoming a formal wizard, you can continue to study slowly. In fact, this exam is also to facilitate Johnny's promotion. After all, she has become a formal wizard now, so it is better to obtain the status as soon as possible. Under the dual stimulation of improving magic and applying for graduation, a group of wizard apprentices burst out with unimaginable enthusiasm, and each one was more serious than the other when listening to the class. Pierce was even more excited. Lin En's promise was undoubtedly the only chance for a mediocre talent like him to be promoted to a formal wizard. Next, we will continue to explain the relevant content of the plane rectangular coordinate system. These are all very basic knowledge. Lin En stretched out his hand, drew a cross in the air with magic, and talked about it incessantly. After the Olympiad class was over, Alok and others walked out of the classroom either thinking hard or looking confused, with their minds full of the so-called absolute value, the first quadrant, the second quadrant, the x-axis, the y-axis. From this point to that point. Pierce glanced at the content in his notes and felt that he seemed to understand it, but he didn't seem to understand it completely. He was ready to think about it carefully after returning. Tick, please stay. After Lin En packed up the teaching tools, he called Tick, who was about to leave. Professor Lin En, what's the matter? Tick stopped, paused, and spoke again. The concept of coordinate system you proposed in class is very interesting. It seems that any object in space can be accurately located. I just don't know which master or legendary wizard came up with this idea. Compared with the apprentices who only cared about learning superficial knowledge, Tick knew very well how important this thing was. He guessed that Lin En was able to accurately hit the dummies from a distance of hundreds of meters, even bypassing the entire screaming tower, and he should have used this knowledge. That was the concept proposed by a master named Descartes. Lin En smiled and replied casually, Descartes, it would be great if I could meet these masters who studied the arcane mathematics, Tick said with emotion. The more he came into contact with it, the more he was surprised by the profoundness of this subject. Maybe there will be a chance in the future. Lin En responded with a smile, and then his face straightened and he thanked him. I heard from Woer before that you have been helping me with the patent application for the aerospace airship, and I haven't had time to thank you yet. It's just a small favor. I can't listen to so many Olympiad classes for nothing. Tick laughed. Calculate the time, they will be here soon. After Lin En made a few polite remarks, he took the opportunity to ask about alchemy. I once heard a scholar in the Secret Law Society say that some wizards can rely on some alchemical formations to improve their strength and break through the upper limit of their strength. I wonder if this is true? Hearing this, Tick frowned slightly, but still explained. Alchemy can indeed do similar things, but now few people in the wizard land do this, Tick said concisely, without any intention of explaining in detail. 100 years ago, when the management of the wizard land was loose, the means of promotion of various schools could only be described as varied, causing many undesirable tragedies. This is also related to a scandal that the Wizard Council is unwilling to mention. And it also involves the evil wizard Merc. Tick doesn't want to talk too much about this kind of knowledge. Lin En also saw this, so he changed the subject and asked about the layout and cracking of the alchemy array. This time, Tick didn't hide it anymore and explained it to Lin En very patiently. The two chatted all the way to the professor's lounge. When he saw the silver gray-haired witch standing at the door waiting, Tick smiled. "I'd better go back alone, Professor Lin En." Tick raised his eyebrows and said jokingly. When Lin En saw Tick's expression, he knew that the other party must have misunderstood, but before he could explain, Tick had already turned around and left. Lin En shook his head, opened the room, invited the witch in, and then asked, "Johnny, after the promotion yesterday, your body is not uncomfortable, right?" The silver gray-haired witch shook her head and looked at Lin En in confusion. "Why do you ask? Is there something wrong?" "No, there's nothing wrong. I'm just asking." Lin En shook his head. It seemed that the potion Johnny took was not strong enough to make the Eye of Death appear in his sea of consciousness. "Next, let's get down to business. We only have 2 hours." Lin En looked at the witch and urged her. Chapter 118. Under Lin En's constant urging, Johnny nodded, and hurriedly took out the notebook in his arms, turned to the latest page, pointed to the question on it and asked, "Professor, I don't know much about the plane rectangular coordinate system you talked about today. Especially this question. If you want to judge the distance between two coordinate points, you have to use the Pythagorean theorem mentioned before. You can mark the difference between the horizontal and vertical coordinates on the coordinate axis, and then connect them with a line. In this way, it becomes two right triangles put together. So it's back to the problem of geometry." Lin En explained Johnny's thinking of solving the problem in a simple and easy-to-understand way. The so-called doing business, that is naturally to give special treatment. After all, Lin En promised before that as long as the other party can pass the exam, he will apply for graduation in the name of the professor. In order to prevent too many people from passing the exam, the number of applicants is too large and finally rejected by the parliament. So the content of the exam is of course the harder the better. However, this difficulty is also limited. It is impossible to come up with some knowledge points that have not been taught before. At most, the question type is slightly difficult. A little bit. In order to ensure that Johnny can answer all the questions correctly, it is necessary to give him a private lesson. Although it is a little unfair to other students, it is not shameful to ask the professor for tutoring. Lin En has never forbidden other apprentices to ask him questions, but Johnny asks more and more in-depth questions. 2 hours passed in a flash. Johnny closed the notebook in his hand, looked up at Lin En, and said with a smile, "Thank you for your guidance, Professor. I have to say that you are really a great teacher." The girl's cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyes were shining as she looked at Lin En in front of her. She seemed to be completely immersed in the academic exchange just now. "I just got in touch with Olympiad Mathematics earlier than you." Lin En shook his head. No matter how early it was only half a year. Johnny rolled his eyes at him, and he understood why the students in the ordinary class looked at them with envy and jealousy in their eyes. This gap in talent was simply despairing. "Then I won't bother you, Professor. See you tomorrow." Johnny put away the notebook filled with answers and solutions and prepared to leave. Lin En stood up and sent the witch to the door. Before leaving, the silver gray-haired witch looked at the knuckles of Lin En's left hand that opened the door and said with a little emotion, "I didn't expect the teacher to give you this." Lin En paused, then followed Johnny's gaze and looked down. On the ring finger of his left hand was the faceless ring of Ladak. Kelu was actually a member of the Faceless. Lin En was very surprised. This was completely beyond his expectations, but his face remained calm. "The teacher cares about this ring? Do you know how to use it?" Johnny shook her head. She only knew that Kelu had been wearing this ring when he accepted her as an apprentice. She guessed that it should be a very powerful alchemical tool, but he had never used it in front of her. After the silver gray-haired witch left, Lin En closed the door and looked at the faceless ring in his hand. Could it be that Kelu revealed his identity? But wasn't this guy captured by the church and taken to the holy city? It would be good if he wasn't tortured and burned to death on the stake. The possibility of escaping is very small. Or did Kelu mention him to someone before he was captured by the church? Number 4 hasn't been here for a long time, right? Lin En suddenly thought of the words that one of them had mentioned when he attended the faceless party. Could it be that this number 4 refers to his mentor Kelu? The next evening, in the southern city of Yayata Harbor, in front of a luxurious manor, 3 convoys pulled by camels slowly stopped in front of the door. Lin En, who had already disguised himself, walked out of the carriage in the appearance of Logic. He was naturally here to participate in the so-called promotion ceremony. Along with Lin En, there were 15 apprentices under Radak. Bach, Patty and others were both expectant and excited, hoping that they would be selected this time, so that they could ascend to heaven in one step and become a noble official wizard. Lord Radak, please come in. The sturdy guard at the door opened the closed iron gate and invited very respectfully. Lin En led a group of apprentices into the gate of the manor and walked towards the interior of the manor along a cobblestone path. Behind him, the sturdy guard had closed the iron gate again, looking at the crowd with a mocking look on his face. But he did not notice that a dozen small black mice quietly slipped into the manor under the influence of the crowd. These mice were naturally puppets controlled by Lin En using the psychic magic, dead manipulation. Their small size was not easy to attract attention. In addition, there were several gray crows and more secretive geckos. Although they don't have much combat power, they can serve as his eyes to observe the layout of the entire manor and the surrounding environment. If necessary, the liquid bombs he carries may also come in handy. After passing through a long corridor, Lin En and others arrived at the banquet hall of the manor. The interior was very spacious, and a variety of exquisite delicacies and desserts were placed on a long table. At this moment, many guests have gathered in the banquet hall. A rough estimate is that there are probably 100 or 200 people, most of whom are apprentices. But there are also many formal wizards. Barbara, Hank are among them, and Lin En even saw Aya, the sheriff of Yayata Harbor. They all have some smiles on their faces, talking to each other, and the atmosphere is quite harmonious. On the stage in the center of the banquet hall, a male servant in a tuxedo is dancing an elegant jazz dance, and a beautiful maid is holding a silver tray, ready to serve drinks and meals to the guests. Radak, why are you always the last one to arrive? Hank saw Lin En coming in at a glance, walked up, and tapped him on the shoulder. It's better to arrive at the right time than to arrive early, isn't it? Lin En looked around the lively scene in the banquet hall and answered casually, then lowered his voice and asked, "Are you sure North will come to this gathering?" In the past few days, Lin En also tried to control the Great Crow to find North's trace, but there was no result. Since he didn't cancel this promotion ceremony, he will definitely come, Barbara said firmly. As soon as Barbara finished speaking, North, dressed in a gray robe, appeared in front of everyone. Chapter 119 You are destroying the foundation of our rights. Welcome everyone to this gathering. Under everyone's attention, North walked out from the passage behind the banquet hall and looked at everyone present with a gentle smile on his face. Hank and others looked at each other with a hint of suspicion in their eyes. They originally thought that North's inexplicable disappearance during this period was to break through and become a great wizard. But now it seems that this is not the case, because they did not feel the obvious sense of oppression from each other, which means that North should be a three-ring wizard like them. Realizing this, Barbara was relieved and a little annoyed at the same time. She interrupted directly without caring about the occasion. North, don't you have to explain some things to us, such as where you have been these days and when you are going to fulfill your promise to us? Barbara's words made the atmosphere on the scene subtle. Leia and others who were invited shook the red wine in their hands and watched the excitement with interest. The wizards of Bloody Thorn looked at Barbara with dissatisfaction. In their opinion, no matter how big the conflict was, it should not be said in such an occasion, otherwise it would make outsiders laugh. However, North didn't care at all. He raised the goblet in his hand calmly, drank the bright liquid in it, and then laughed. After this promotion ceremony, I will not lose a penny of what I promised you. North's straightforward guarantee made Barbara and Hank hesitate. They couldn't help but wonder if their guess was wrong. Could it be that North didn't intend to get something for nothing as they imagined, and actually sold his property to raise funds for them these days? The two turned their heads and looked at Lin En. The latter shook his head and didn't answer. His mind was already on the rats and gray crows wandering in the manor. The entire manor has been completely closed, with a guard every 5 steps and a sentry every 10 steps. The door of the banquet hall was blocked from the outside. What exactly does North want to do? Was it just for the sake of warning, or was he going to kill all the people who came to the gathering? You have to know that in addition to more than 100 wizard apprentices, there are more than 10 formal wizards and 7 3-ring wizards. These people should not be underestimated in terms of strength or the influence of the Ida Harbor. Lin En controlled the Grey Crow to rise to a higher altitude, overlooking the entire scene from the air, and then keenly noticed that the manor where the gathering was held was planned very neatly, with the banquet hall as the center, and dozens of silver pillars about half a meter high were placed everywhere. From the sky, the layout of the entire manor looked like a super-large alchemical formation. Lin En recalled the alchemical knowledge he learned from Tick, and quickly determined that these pillars should be made of precious mithril as the nodes of the entire formation. With a thought, a small-looking rat sneaked past along the shadow of the high wall, found an area with the weakest guard, and planned to observe it closely. But just as he was about to approach, Lin En suddenly felt a black screen in front of his eyes, as if someone had unplugged the network cable while he was spying with a camera. After that, he could only feel the pain of the rat dying. Through the perspective of the Great Crow, a ferocious wolfhound with a brown body and water on the corner of its mouth was wandering near the mithril pillar. Several patrolling guards also noticed the movement here, but when they walked over to take a look, they found that the wolfhound was holding a dead rat in its mouth. After a few curses, they ignored it. The rats in the entire South City district were about to be flooded. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't kill them all. After several guards passed by, the ferocious wolfhound still loyally guarded this area, and his eyes were directly fixed on the remaining rats hiding in the shadows. Good guy, dogs fighting rats. Lin En suddenly felt a little tricky. Although these creatures were under his control, they had no special abilities. Their combat effectiveness was no different from that of an ordinary rat. No matter how many there were, they might not be able to defeat a vicious dog. The only advantage was that they had the support of the Air Force. Of course, it must be killed in one blow, and it must not be given a chance to scream. While Lin En was secretly planning an animal war, North in the banquet hall put down the red wine glass in his hand and said, "Since everyone has no other questions, I think it's better to start the promotion ceremony now." Hank's face was a little hesitant. He looked at Leia and others who were invited by them, and felt a little regretful in his heart. This is the internal secret of Bloodthorn. Otherwise, it's not too late to confirm the list after the banquet. Barbara also raised an objection. "No, there's no need to be so troublesome. I think this time's promotion ceremony can be done in a different way." A smile appeared at the corner of North's mouth. "In recent days, I have used special materials to research a new alchemical formation." As he spoke, North raised his hand downwards, and a series of fine runes suddenly lit up on the floor of the banquet hall. The dense runes were constantly linked together, occupying half of the area of the entire banquet hall. The outer circle was a big circle, and the inner circle was a complex geometric figure, composed of countless complicated lines, revealing a strange beauty. The faces of the formal wizards present all changed, and they quickly left the range covered by the formation, and Lin En was no exception. Before confirming the effectiveness of this formation, no one was willing to take the risk. North didn't mind, and turned his head to look at the apprentices of Blood Red Thorn, and continued, "This alchemical formation can increase the power of wizards. Generally speaking, the longer you persist in the formation, the higher the increase. Of course, everyone's will, endurance, and potential are different. I can't guarantee that you will be promoted successfully, but you can try it." Hearing this, Hank and Barbara frowned and looked at the alchemical formation that appeared on the ground with a somewhat ugly expression. North had changed the promotion ceremony process without informing them in advance, and even created a so-called alchemy array, which made the two suspect that North wanted to reduce their power. You have to know that one of the most important reasons why these wizard apprentices are willing to work hard for them is that as core members of the Bloody Thorns, they hold the quota for promotion, and they can use this as bait to drive the apprentices to work hard. North's actions are undoubtedly destroying the foundation of their power. Chapter 120. This is, compared to Barbara and Hank, who looked grim, the wizard apprentices present were very excited. In the past promotion ceremonies, there were often only 3 to 5 places available, and most of them could only watch, hoping to continue to work hard to get a precious place next year. But this time was different. Everyone had equal opportunities, and the extent of the power increase depended only on how long they could persist in the alchemy array. Everyone firmly believed that they would be able to persist to the end, but Lin En and others were very powerful on weekdays. For a while, except for the apprentices under North, no one took the initiative to stand up. However, in the face of great temptation, betrayal was only a matter of time. After hesitating for a long time, Bach gritted his teeth and stood in the alchemy array, his body trembling, and he did not dare to turn his head to look at Lin En's expression. He was gambling. He was betting that he could become a formal wizard this time, so that he would not have to fear the other party's difficulties. Lin En looked at Bach meaningfully, but did not say anything. He did not think North would be so kind. Seeing that Lin En had no intention of punishing Bach, Patty and the others, who could no longer hold back, stood in the alchemy array one after another, followed by the apprentices behind Barbara and Hank. "You, how dare you!" Seeing the apprentices she brought with her step into the alchemy array without even saying hello, Barbara was furious and turned her head to glare at Lin En angrily. If he had not acquiesced to the apprentice's departure, things would not have developed to this point. "It's useless." Lin En shook his head. These wizard apprentices joined Bloodthorn for only one purpose, that is, to become formal wizards, so facing the temptation of promotion, I'm afraid no one can resist it. No matter what he does, it's meaningless. "This is really interesting." Leia laughed softly. The few wizards watching on the sidelines also watched the fun, but they were more curious whether this alchemy array was really as magical as North said. North drank the red wine on the table, looked at the more than 100 apprentices standing in the alchemy circle, with a satisfied smile on his face, and gently tapped the scepter in his hand, and the entire alchemy circle was activated. The fine runes flashed with dark green light, and then a strong wave of magic power emanated from the circle. The apprentices in the center of the circle immediately felt that some kind of power was pouring into their bodies, and then their own magic power seemed to be pulled and ready to move. "Really, it's true, my magic power has increased." Bach felt the surging power in his body and shouted excitedly. It was a wonderful feeling of emptiness, mistiness, and comfort. He felt as if his soul was humming. He would soon become a formal wizard. Leia and others who were watching watched the scene in the circle intently. Originally, they had deep doubts about this alchemy circle that could help apprentices advance. After all, the growth of magic power in these apprentices has reached the limit, and it is not easy to increase it again. However, Bach's heartfelt praise made several people hesitate. Moreover, the surging magic power around him is indeed a sign of breaking through to the official wizard. Barbara and Hank even vaguely guessed that the special material used by North to arrange their formation is most likely the blood of the Eye of Death. Only that terrifying monster has enough energy to meet the promotion of hundreds of apprentices at the same time. "Sir North, I wonder if this kind of alchemy formation is still useful for formal wizards?" an old wizard asked excitedly. "It's useful, of course it's useful." North laughed happily. At this moment, a wizard apprentice in the magic circle suddenly let out a painful roar, and then the whole person fell to the ground. Bach, Patty and the others also felt a heart-wrenching pain at this moment. At first, they ignored it and thought it was the sequelae of breaking through the physical limit. They still persisted. After all, North said that the longer they persisted, the greater the magic power they gained. In just a short while, the magic power in their bodies had increased by 50%. But as more and more people fell, Bach could no longer hold on. What shocked him even more was that the power that had been absorbed into his body before had now become a deadly poison. His body was rapidly withering and decaying, and his soul seemed to be torn apart by some strange power. Seeing rows of wizard apprentices fall down with distorted expressions and completely silent, even the dumbest people could realize that something was wrong. "North, what the hell are you doing?" Hank scolded angrily. North did not answer, but murmured nervously, "Since you all want to increase your magic power, I will satisfy you." After absorbing the power of dozens of wizard apprentices, the power of the alchemy array is becoming more and more powerful. Leia, who was standing by, seemed to have suddenly thought of something, as if a chill surged from the soles of her feet to her heart, and she shouted in fear, "No, this is the soul-devouring array of the evil wizard Merc. Are you crazy, North?" Barbara's face showed an expression of disbelief. North's mouth opened and laughed wildly. "Of course not, Barbara, using blood to water the most beautiful thorn flower. This is the meaning of the existence of Bloodthorn, isn't it?" More than 3 years ago, the evil wizard Merc used the blood of the Mind Flayer to arrange the alchemy array, sacrificed an entire village and many apprentices in the Genik school, and used the souls of thousands of people as nourishment, wanting to step into the realm of legendary wizards. Although the evil wizard Merc failed, his power was greatly improved, and he was even able to compete head-on with several great wizards sent by the Parliament. North was not greedy. The legendary wizard was too far away from him. It was enough for him to use this power to become a real great wizard. "Come on, all of you will become part of the honorable great wizard, North," North said crazily. "Madman, he's crazy, kill him," Leia shouted loudly. The 20 or so wizards in the banquet hall were also furious, raising their hands to cast spells, ready to tear the madman in front of them into pieces. Hank didn't even care that this was indoors for a moment, and raised his hand to cast a pyroblast, intending to blow up North and the alchemy array on the ground together. But the next moment, Hank felt that his soul was disturbed, as if something pierced his head fiercely, and he twitched all over in pain. The hot fireball exploded on the spot before it was launched. Chapter 121 Hell on Earth. The originally spacious and lively banquet hall turned into a hell on earth in an instant. Those wizards who tried to resist soon realized that something was wrong. Many people, like Hank, suffered strong magic backlash at the moment of casting the spell. Some covered their heads and wailed, while others were directly knocked out by their own magic. With the soul disturbed, even casting the most basic magic became a luxury. Desperate shouts and screams were heard incessantly, but North was intoxicated and enjoyed everything in front of him. The chaos at this moment was the best help for his promotion. Lin En, who was in the chaotic crowd, was quickly checking his physical condition. This was not to say that he was also affected by the magic circle, but that Lin En did not understand why all the wizards present looked like they were mentally shocked. He did not seem to encounter any attack. Was it because he had absorbed the power of the Eye of Death? Lin En immediately thought of this. The core of this magic circle should be the blood of the Eye of Death, and he had the same power in his body. Apart from Lin En, the only one who still had some resistance on the field was Leia, who was proficient in plasticity. When he realized that something was wrong, he began to transform, and then a 2-meter-tall owl beast appeared in the chaotic banquet hall. Leia's eyes were red, and he let out a sharp roar. Obviously, he was also affected by the magic circle. He first slapped a wizard who was blocking the way and sent him flying, and then rushed straight to North. "Your resistance is meaningless," North said mockingly, opened his hands, condensed dozens of thick ice blades and flew away, ready to nail the running owl beast to the wall behind. However, these ice blades were broken one by the magic missiles that came from nowhere. The owl beast had crossed a distance of more than 10 meters at this moment and slapped North directly. A solid, made shield, lit up around North, but it was still directly smashed by the huge power of the owl beast. With a bang, North was hit against the wall of the banquet hall. His entire right arm was twisted and deformed, and even the white bones were exposed. But he soon struggled to stand up. With the continuous replenishment of energy, the injuries on his body recovered quickly. Then he quickly cast the magic barrier to protect himself in all directions to avoid being injured by these people's fragile resistance. The owl beast roared again, but this time it was blown away by a spell shock, before it could move forward. At the same time, Lin En's magic was also completed. A large amount of corrosive aqua regia penetrated into the floor tiles, corroding the alchemy array in the center of the banquet hall. Radak, I didn't expect you to be able to resist until now. North also noticed Lin En's existence at this time. He looked at the alchemy array that was nearly half corroded, his face twisted, and then he said viciously, "It's useless, this is just a secondary array, it should be about time." North shouted enthusiastically. "Now, everyone, merge with me." As North spoke, through the perspective of the gray crow in the sky, Lin En clearly saw that the mithril pillars erected in the manor also lit up. Then, a series of faint blue lights floated out from everyone's body. The intensity and size of these flickering lights varied. The higher the level of the wizard, the stronger the flickering light. A small part rushed into North's body, and most of them merged into the magic circle covering the entire manor. Even Leia, who had transformed into an owl beast, could not resist and soon fell to the ground in pain. Energy concentration is detected to rise rapidly. A large amount of soul power is detected. Do you want to absorb and convert it into energy reserves? In Lin En's mind, two intelligent brain prompts sounded. Yes. Lin En looked at the blue light floating in the banquet hall and shouted silently in his heart. If he did not absorb these soul powers, they would be used to enhance North's power instead. The spirit has been captured, and it is expected to be converted into 3% of energy reserves. The current remaining energy is 37.5%. The spirit has been captured, and it is expected to be converted into 5% of energy reserves. More than a dozen prompts sounded in succession. Lin En had never thought that the energy reserves of the intelligent brain could increase so quickly. After just a few seconds, the energy reserves of the intelligent brain reached 100%. The overflowing energy will be automatically used to improve the progress of cracking the virtual space. On the other side, North was also feeling the rising power in his body. This was the first time he felt the increase of magic power in 9 years. However, North soon found a little abnormality. Although his magic power increased rapidly, it was still a little short of breaking through the Great Wizard. "This is impossible. This is impossible. What went wrong?" North shouted crazily. There were hundreds of wizard apprentices, 7 three-ring wizards, and more than 10 formal wizards in the entire banquet hall. Such a huge soul power was enough to send himself to a higher realm. However, the reality was different from what he had expected. Although he had become stronger than before, he still had not broken through the limits of a 3-ring wizard. "It was you. It must have been you, Ladak." North looked at Lin En, the only one standing in the banquet hall, viciously. Before, he thought that the other party had only temporarily resisted the influence of the soul-devouring array, but now it seemed that it might not be that simple. "You can't blame me for this. Maybe you accidentally drew the wrong array," Lin En said sarcastically while distracting himself from controlling the rats and crows that were fighting with the vicious dog. These words obviously had no effect, because the soul power that was escaping from the air was pouring into his body. North obviously noticed this too. He felt his heart tightened as if it was about to explode. "You bastard, this is all my power." For this moment today, he had prepared for 3 years and paid a huge price. He would never allow any accidents to happen. "Kill you. As long as I kill you, everything will come back." Perhaps the blow was too great. North's mental state was not right, and his eyes turned red. Since part of his soul was absorbed by Lin En, he only needed to kill the other party, and this part of the power would eventually return to his body. Chapter 122 Lin En, I just lied to you, idiot. North's expression gradually changed from ferocious and angry to cold and dead silence. The magic power scattered around was quickly mobilized and then immersed in the dozens of armors displayed around the banquet hall, which looked like decorations. Under the combined effect of magic and psychic power, these unconscious dead things actually moved like real guards, waving the giant axes and bows in their hands, and rushed towards Lin En in an orderly manner. Fossils into mud. Lin En dodged 5 flying arrows, and then raised his hand to point to the ground. Under the sweep of magic waves, rows of floor tiles were transformed into fine sand and gravel. The psychic guards who rushed over were like rolling gourds and fell directly into the sand. Then these sand and gravel that were soaked in magic power piled up. Psychic spell, Summon the Sphinx. Lin En learned from North and used the psychic magic that he was not proficient in. The piled-up sand and gravel eventually turned into a monster with a human upper body and a lion-like lower body. However, since it was the first time to try this new thing, the Sphinx looked very distorted, like a figurine made by a child. After punching away 3 or 2 psychic guards that rushed over, half of its body was blown off by a pyroblast, magic, barrage. After realizing that half-baked psychic spells could not provide much help in the battle, Lin En once again used the magic he was best at. Dozens of flashing missiles were suspended in the air, like a dense rain of arrows, covering most of the banquet hall. With a series of roars, the remaining psychic guards were all smashed into pieces, and then they crashed directly into the solid, magic barrier behind them. Each one was like a cannonball, and it exploded immediately after hitting the magic barrier. In just 2 seconds, the solid, magic barrier was already covered with cracks. Just when the barrier was about to break, North opened his mouth. A sharp sound wave reverberated in the banquet hall, and more than 10 magic missiles that were about to hit the barrier exploded instantly. Lin En paused for a moment, and his movements stopped. That was Soul Scream. When North saw that Lin En's movements had an obvious pause, he immediately understood that the opponent's soul power was not as strong as his, and immediately raised the scepter in his hand. Magic impact. On the top of the scepter, the fine runes lit up one by one, and then a strong magic beam suddenly shot out, aiming directly at Lin En, who was unable to move under the influence of Soul Scream. However, North soon discovered to his horror that Lin En, who should have been unable to move, actually raised his arm freely, and a faint flame condensed at his fingertips, and then the flames quickly expanded and condensed into a huge, demon hand composed of endless flames, which collided with the flying magic beam. The violent white phosphorus fire almost instantly devoured the beam of magic power, and fiercely imprinted on the already shattered magic barrier. Crack! A crisp sound came, and the entire magic barrier was shattered. Then the demon's hand swept across every inch of the banquet hall with a devastating attitude. Everything that blocked its path was destroyed in an instant, and finally rushed to North behind. North only had time to release a mage shield, and then he was swept into the scorching flames. A shrill scream soon came out from the raging sea of fire. The weak mage shield was obviously unable to withstand the white phosphorus flame demon's hand that had reached the limit of the third ring of magic. In just a moment, the white phosphorus flame came into close contact with North's body. It was like a demon flame from hell, greedily attached to the body, using flesh and blood as nutrients, eroding every inch of his skin. The originally outstanding physical recovery speed has now become a torture. Under the continuous repair and destruction, North's spirit is almost collapsed. The magic power in his body has been exhausted soon, and the speed of physical recovery has become slower and slower. Lin En raised his hand and extinguished the white phosphorus flames. North's body has been burned beyond recognition and looks almost like a dried corpse, but his huge soul power allows him to maintain his last consciousness. His red eyes stare at Lin En, as if he still doesn't understand why the other party can suddenly break free from the shackles of Soul Scream. "I just lied to you, idiot," Lin En said coldly. After drinking the source of magic power, made by the Eye of Death's ectoplasm and becoming a psychic, the soul power he possesses is not worse than that of North, who has swallowed a lot of soul power. So when the other party used Soul Scream, although Lin En was affected to some extent, it was not to the extent that he could not move or cast spells. Pretending to be controlled, he wanted to make North relax his guard, so that he could use the strongest magic to kill him. North's eyes widened, blood flowed from the corners of his mouth, and his body began to twitch. He seemed to want to say something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, his life force was completely gone. Could it be that he was angry to death? Lin En shook his head, walked forward, put his right hand on North's hot head, and activated the psychic spell, ready to retrieve the other party's memory. But soon he found that North's memory was in disarray and was still dissipating rapidly. Obviously, the person who set up this formation could not escape the fate of being devoured in the end. Lin En looked at the intelligent brain that did not respond, and immediately confirmed his guess. The intelligent brain converts and absorbs spirits into energy, which is not without restrictions. In addition to being very close to itself, there should be strength requirements. Judging from the fact that the converted energy reserves do not exceed 10%, those who are directly captured and absorbed should be the souls of wizard apprentices, and they must be in a state of being separated from the physical body. Just as he was thinking, there were bursts of explosions outside the banquet hall. Lin En's expression remained unchanged. He was controlling the rats and crows to quietly use liquid bombs to destroy several formation nodes in the manor. However, Lin En soon discovered that the development of things seemed to be different from what he expected. The soul-devouring formation covering the entire banquet hall did not end, but continued to spread to the outside world. The guards who heard the explosion and were rushing to the formation nodes suddenly fell to the ground with painful expressions on their faces. The blue spiritual light drilled out of their bodies and then sank into the ground. Not only that, the hounds patrolling in the manor, the horses and camels in the stables did not escape the fate of having their souls extracted. The devouring formation, which was once again strengthened, flashed dark green fluorescence and surged to the entire South City district. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We are waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 123 The Truth of Everything. Through the perspective of the Great Crow, Lin En also saw the soul-devouring array that was spreading, and his brows frowned slightly. The creatures under his control seemed to be able to avoid the fate of having their souls extracted, but to Lin En's surprise, he had just destroyed several nodes of the array. According to Tick, this thing should have stopped. Could it be that he was wrong? The nodes of the array were not here, or there was a more critical array? The power of the soul-devouring array is self-evident. Even three-ring wizards like Barbara and Hank are not immune, not to mention the poor people in the South City. Lin En didn't know whether this thing would expand indefinitely. If it did, I'm afraid the entire Yayata harbor would be swallowed up. With such a huge soul power, what kind of monster will be born in the end? Lin En was thinking about it, and the few mice sent to search the entire manor discovered the secret. The bottom of the entire banquet hall was empty, and there was a very secret passage, which might lead to the array center of the soul-devouring magic array. Squeak, squeak. At night, under the manor where the gathering was held, a series of faint mouse sounds rang out in the narrow underground passage. Several small mice were running quickly in the passage, stopping from time to sniff, or using their claws to pull a few times to make sure that there were no traps here, and then continued to run wildly. Not far behind, most of Lin En's attention had turned to the prompt sound that kept ringing in the intelligent brain. Cracking progress 94%. 97%. 100%. The remaining soul power has been reserved. Do you want to seize control of the virtual domain? Seeing that the progress had reached the maximum value, Lin En did not rush to agree, but asked what the purpose of this virtual domain was. After the intelligent computer replied, Lin En realized that this thing was similar to the metaverse created by the Federation in his previous life. But the difference is that this field is made up of magic power, between illusion and reality, and can change according to the imagination of the authority holder. As long as he wants, he can completely transform the chaotic space into a projection of the universe. Of course, this premise is that he has the corresponding data and enough magic power. For example, if he wants to materialize a star in the virtual field, he must recognize the essence of the star. Otherwise, the materialized sun will only have an appearance. Not only will it not emit light or heat, but it will also break like cotton. This is probably the reason why the owner of the virtual field did not make it fancy. In theory, as long as there is enough accurate data, everything constructed will be the same as the real world. This is much better than the virtual space under the banner of the metaverse in the previous life. Although some companies often boast a lot in their publicity, claiming that they have more than 90% authenticity, Lin En, who has truly experienced it, knows that this is pure nonsense. It is good to have about 60% to 70%, and there are bugs everywhere. However, this virtual realm composed of magic power could really achieve a degree of reality close to 100%, becoming the second world in the literal sense. However, to accomplish this, the magic power required was obviously an astronomical figure, which could not be expected in a short period of time. Lin En quickly stopped his fantasy and turned to check the two main functions of the virtual realm. The first was naturally to pull people in for a gathering, using the ring as a medium to project the magic power of the holder's soul into the virtual realm. The second function was a bit sinister, as it could reversely connect to the holder's mental power through the ring and retrieve part of the other party's computing power. To make an inappropriate analogy, the brain of every wizard was like a high-speed biological computer, and the process of projecting magic power into the virtual realm was like connecting to the internet, which naturally came with corresponding risks, such as exposing one's own mental power frequency. This process was not completed instantly, but was very slow. Judging from the frequency of the Faceless Men's weekly gatherings, it would take several years to crack the mental defenses of a formal wizard, and it was precisely because of the long time that it was concealed enough. At the last gathering, the entire Faceless organization, including him, had a total of 15 members, all of whom should be 3-ring wizards. Now that Crimson Thorns has been destroyed, there are at least 9 members excluding himself. I just don't know how much computing power can be called up. 071. Can you locate the source of magic power in this virtual realm? Lin En asked in his mind. He knew with his feet that this thing must require a huge supply of magic power to operate. The signal source has been located. Located 30 meters in front. So close. Lin En paused, and then saw a scene that surprised him through the perspective of several rats. At the end of the passage is a spacious circular hall, with an altar-like platform in the center. There are many complex patterns drawn on each step, which are very similar to the alchemical formation used to bind spirits that Lin En saw in the Lotic secret room, but it is more complicated in comparison. Many faint blue fluorescent lights were pouring out from the ground and merging into the almost solid spirit body above. The mouse looked up high and saw a figure that he was very familiar with. At this moment, Lin En had also crossed the narrow passage and was shocked by the vengeful spirit floating on the high platform. It was a girl about 8 or 9 years old, wearing a gorgeous long dress, long hair draped over her shoulders, slender and thin, with faint blue auras all over her body. There were strange spiderweb-like patterns on her exposed skin, as if it would break if touched. Unlike her delicate and cute appearance like a puppet, her face was hideous and distorted, as if she was in great pain, and she exuded a terrifying aura. Lydia? After seeing the face of the vengeful spirit clearly, Lin En shouted subconsciously, but then rejected this point. No, this is not Lydia. Although the other party looked very similar to the halfling girl, she had long hair, round ears, and her clothes and appearance were completely different. In a sense, spirits don't have clothes. They are just manifestations of soul power, showing the most profound memory of their previous life. So the soul in front of him should not be Lydia. It can only be, she is Yaida, my daughter. A deep voice resounded in the tower. Lin En turned his head subconsciously and saw Helram, who had been away for a long time, the founder of the Yaita school, the ruler of the harbor town. The great wizard who had gone to Greenreal 2 weeks ago, was standing here at this moment. Chapter 124, Lin En. What? I am the evil wizard Merc. Helram looked at the distorted face of Yaida, who was tied to the high platform, with a look of reluctance on his face, but his expression soon became firm again. He turned his head and looked at Lin En, asking, "You don't seem surprised." "Surprised? I'm afraid it's a little bit, but there is only one great wizard in Yaita Harbor, right?" Seeing that Heron Ram didn't seem to have any intention of attacking him, Lin En responded freely. The moment he saw the other party, Lin En's previous doubts were solved. The person who could gather so many 3-ring wizards, form the Faceless, and create a virtual domain was most likely a great wizard. But before, Lin En thought that this matter was related to the evil wizard Merc. After all, many of the psychic books collected by Ladakh were signed by the other party, and the soul-devouring magic circle was also created by Merc. But now think about it, There are too many unnatural things in Yayata Harbor. Under the situation that the parliament completely banned the study of psychic magic, an organization like Faceless was born here, where all the members are psychic wizards. The Bloody Thorn formed by North and others is too large. Not only does it have 6 three-ring wizards as core members, but it also has more than 10 formal wizards and hundreds of wizard apprentices. Even Sheriff Leia has some unclear connection with the Bloody Thorn, coupled with the chaotic scene of magic workshops in the southern city. Either Hiram, the controller of the harbor town, is too incompetent, or the other party deliberately lets it go. Now it seems to be the latter. So, North's actions today are also your instructions? Lin En asked. No, that's just his own idea. North is probably going to take advantage of my absence to complete the breakthrough with the soul-devouring formation and get out of my control. That's all, Hiram replied concisely. Lin En didn't believe a word of it. Since Hiram was standing here, it proved that North's little calculations were still within the other party's expectations. In other words, Hiram deliberately spread the news to let North know that he had left the Yayata Harbor, so that he could boldly go to hunt the Eye of Death and set up the soul-devouring array. Poor North was like a white glove. Lin En could imagine that if there was no interference from him, North would probably be able to successfully become a great wizard, and then he would find that the soul-devouring array was inexplicably out of control and spread to the entire South City, causing greater chaos. Hiram would rush to the last moment and kill the culprit to quell the riot, abandoning North and the entire Bloody Thorn as abandoned pawns, using the promotion of a three-ring wizard to give an explanation to the parliament and remove himself from this incident. Hiram's ruthlessness and meticulousness were undoubtedly revealed. So, the person who wrote the letter and invited me to join the Faceless Ones was also you? Lin En asked again. Hiram did not answer, but suddenly asked, what should I call you? Lin, Carl, or evil mage Merc? Although Lin appeared in front of him in the image of logic, Hiram did not judge based on a person's appearance, but distinguished by magic. What, I am the evil mage Merc? Lin's face became a little strange, not quite understanding why Hiram thought so. 2 weeks ago in the training ground, when you accepted Laur's challenge, you were just a wizard apprentice, right? Although Hiram was asking, his tone was very affirmative. The essential difference between an apprentice and a formal wizard lies in the magical mimicry element. This is something that everyone in the entire wizard land knows, but only the great wizard can perceive the subtle differences in the nature of magic between the two, which is most obvious during the battle. But Lin was beyond his expectations. As a wizard apprentice, he cast the ice field, with a power exceeding the ordinary three-ring magic, and mastered a lot of novel knowledge, which is obviously not something a wizard apprentice can do. Hiram could only think of one possibility, that is, possession. 3 years ago, he volunteered to go to the north with 2 great wizards to destroy the entire Genik school, but unlike his 2 colleagues, he had another idea, that is to obtain the research results of the evil wizard Merc on Geniks. Although he encountered a lot of troubles along the way, Hiram finally got what he wanted. It was just that due to the previous fierce battle, many precious magic books were burned, so many Genik research materials were incomplete, which led to the emergence of Faceless and Bloodthorn. Hiram carefully selected more than 10 three-ring wizards who were eager to break through, and spread the Genik materials he had obtained before, so that these people could secretly carry out Genik research on his behalf. Just as he expected, with the continuous efforts and countless bloodshed and sacrifices of North and others, in just 3 years, they restored the means of arranging the soul-devouring array and the method of transferring the soul to another body. The only thing missing was the material to replace the blood of the Mind Flayer, and another more critical technology. At this critical moment, Lin En suddenly appeared in the port of Yaida, and brought 2 very crucial things, an airship that can defeat the Eye of Death, and a witch's body that has lost its soul but is well preserved. This looks very perfect, like a gift specially prepared for himself, and it is precisely because of this that Hiram felt a trace of fear. Just like the Bloodthorn in his hand, which is like a puppet, at that moment he vaguely suspected that he was just a member of the game. In the original battle, everyone thought that the evil wizard Merc was dead, but Hiram, who had read a lot of psychic books, had a hunch that the other party was not really dead. In the past 3 years, the evil wizard Merc seemed to have completely disappeared. Perhaps the other party has left the wizard's land, but one day he will come back again. Halram stared at Lin En in front of him. Although the magic fluctuations did not match at all, there was a possibility of change after the fusion of souls, so he had to suspect that the person in front of him was the evil wizard Merc. After all, the timing of the other party's appearance was too coincidental. Facing Halram's questioning, Lin En refuted, "If I were the evil wizard Merc, a former great wizard, I would never show any flaws in the training ground and expose my identity." "Obviously you are wrong. I am Lin En, and only Lin En, that's all," Lin En said firmly. Chapter 125 Capture the Demonic Net. Lin En's words made Halram pause for a moment, but this did not affect his judgment. A wizard apprentice could never master so much secret knowledge. Compared with the so-called secret law society, he believed more in the possibility of possession. However, Halram did not continue to dwell on this topic, and spoke in a deep voice. "In fact, I don't care about your identity, and I have no ill intentions in inviting you to join the Faceless. I just need one thing." Lin En looked at the great wizard in surprise, not quite understanding what he meant. "The perfect way to merge souls," Halram said word by word, and then continued to speak. "You can put forward any conditions, as long as I can do it." Halram kept his attitude very low, and did not intend to take action directly. Any great wizard is not easy to deal with. Since the other party can complete the fusion and conversion of souls, his research on genetics will only be better than his. North is dead. If the people in the parliament are not stupid, they can find out about you. Lin En shook his head. The promise of a great wizard was undoubtedly very tempting, but Halram's guarantee was meaningless because he was already in trouble. "And unfortunately, I don't have the kind of thing you said," Lin En said directly. "It seems that you are not going to cooperate." Halram's tone suddenly became cold, and his old and hunched body became straight. A strong wave of magic emerged from his body and enveloped the entire circular hall. "Then I can only do it myself and find it out from your brain." Halram's eyes were cold, and he approached step by step. An inexplicable pressure instantly descended on Lin En's mind. This was a double suppression of the spiritual level and magic. Lin En immediately felt that all the elements in the entire space had been infected by the opponent's magic. His body seemed to be stuck in a quagmire, and any action required several times more energy than usual. This is the fourth ring magic, slow barrier. With each step forward, the magic power around him became denser. He raised his right hand and pointed at Lin En, and the elements in the space suddenly became extremely active. An indescribable sense of crisis suddenly surged into Lin En's mind. This magic could not be dodged or resisted. At that moment, he even smelled the smell of death. Facing an unknown opponent who could complete the fusion of souls, Halram had no intention of holding back. The first move was the 5-ring spell, Magic Torrent. However, what Lin En was waiting for was the moment when Halram cast the spell with all his strength. He shouted in his mind without hesitation, 071, immediately. "Now seize control of the virtual realm for me." Apostrophe in the vast space, the jumping elemental torrent seemed to suddenly stop, and Halram's steps also stopped, because a pain as if his soul was split suddenly hit his heart. The magic net was seized. Halram's face was full of horror and disbelief. He could clearly sense that his connection with the virtual realm was completely cut off, and the huge computing power originally bestowed on him suddenly dissipated. More importantly, the moment the spell was broken, the terrifying magic backlash was projected onto the body. White phosphorus, hand of the flame demon. Lin En would naturally not give up this offensive opportunity that he risked his life and worked hard to create. He directly used the strongest killing move. The blazing flames turned into a huge demon hand and rushed straight to him, but the hot flame flow was separated by some mysterious force just before it touched the body, just like a torrent blocked by a reef. Fourth ring spell, Deflection Field. However, who was resisting the backlash and casting the spell again, was in a very bad state at the moment. Scarlet blood overflowed from the corners of his mouth, and his old and wrinkled skin also cracked in several places, revealing the shriveled flesh underneath. "This is impossible," Halram ignored the discomfort in his body and stared at Lin En with disbelief in his eyes. The magic net is the greatest achievement of his research in the past few decades. It can connect the spiritual power of wizards. More importantly, it has nothing to do with the evil wizard Merc. The source of his magic power is in his own hands, but now he has easily seized control of it. This simply overturned Halram's cognition. Unless the other party was originally a legendary wizard. Lin En did not answer. At this moment, he was experiencing the huge computing power blessing brought by the spiritual power of connecting 9 three-ring wizards. It was a new world. Lin En could clearly feel the surge of magic power, and even saw something that he had never seen before. The space around Ram seemed to have undergone a certain degree of deformation, so the hot flame flow would pass over the real target in the surrounding posture. Is this force field magic? I'm afraid that most offensive magic will be completely ineffective under such power. Lin En was thinking, and suddenly felt his head swelled up, like a sealed iron barrel being continuously filled with gas. The mental power of 9 three-ring wizards was obviously close to the upper limit of his brain. Magic barrage. All thoughts were in the moment. The moment Lin En found that Hand of the Flame Demon was ineffective, he raised his hand and condensed hundreds of magic missiles, testing the weakness of this force field magic. Continuous magic missiles were fired at Halram from all directions and angles. As long as the curvature of the space was tested, it might be possible to hurt the opponent. However, Halram obviously did not give him this opportunity. He held up his body and tapped his fingers lightly. A wave of invisible ripples spread forward in a semicircular shape. The magic missiles, flying in the air, exploded one after another before they got close. This was the second time that Lin En had faced such strange magic, but it was different from the time he faced Troll. It was 1,000 times more powerful. This time, he could clearly see a strange magic wave that crushed all the missiles into pieces and was rapidly pressing towards this side. The speed was so fast that Lin En didn't even have time to cast a spell to protect himself. Cell demonization. Just before the magic wave approached, Lin En jumped up and, with the help of the power of the magic cells, narrowly avoided the strange magic wave. But being in midair also meant that he lost the ability to turn. At the same time, countless slender and sharp iron thorns appeared in the void, rushing down like locusts and arrows, covering half of the hall. Fourth ring spell, Iron Sandstorm. Just as Lin En had expected before, the great wizard could mimic and control more elements, but he was the first to experience this. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.